Thank you. A couple of items. For all in attendance, please note that our meeting today is being live streamed on the NCPC website. Second, noticing we do have a quorum, so we will proceed, and without objection, we'll proceed along the lines of the agenda. I will note that it's been publicly noticed. I will note there's been a slight change in the order of things, but not overly substantive. So, agenda item number 1 is the report of the chairman, and I have three items to note. First, before I forget it, our July 10th meeting next month. We start our meetings at 1 o'clock. Next month, we'll start at about 1:15, just a few minutes late. As Mr. Acosta will note shortly, there's a speaker series that NCPC is putting on. It's across the street at the National Archives. It ends at 1 o'clock, and so we'll hustle back across the street, but we'll be just a little bit delayed in getting started. Second, I'll note that I'm pleased to announce that House Resolution 4192, which was the bill to amend the Height Act to allow human occupancy of penthouses above the top story of a building. You recall it passed the House, passed the Senate, and President Obama signed it into law on May 16th. So that really ends the very good partnership that NCPC and the District of Columbia had on the whole Height Act exercise, the study, the report writing, and then the legislation that resulted from it. And this was Representative Ice's legislation. The last item is I'll note just that pursuant to delegations of authority from the Commission, I did approve the transfer of jurisdiction of approximately 0.91 acres of Reservation 520 from the District of Columbia to the National Park Service, and then the transfer of jurisdiction for the same property from the National Park Service to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for the development of residential units on that property. And staff has found that all of that was consistent with what the property could be used for. So that concludes my report. Are there any questions on that? Hearing none, agenda item number 2 is the report of the Executive Director, Mr. Acosta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the Chairman noted, on Thursday, July 10th, NCPC, the National Archives, will present Washington Civil War Forts and Parks, commemorating the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Fort Stevens. The session will take place from noon to 1 p.m. in the National Archives William McGowan Theater. Again, as the Chairman mentioned, this is right before the Commission meeting, so we will be starting the meeting at 1:15. The Commission meeting at 1:15. The program will look at the development of Washington Civil War forts, the role in the war, and the ensuing transformation into the national parks and cultural resources known as the Fort Circle Parks. Before you also is a flyer outlining the program. This is also an informal kickoff for the official commemoration of the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Fort Stevens, which will take place that weekend. Also, we'd like to thank the National Park Service for their good work on the Fort Circle Park system, as well as the upcoming commemoration. So we all hope that you can make it before the meeting. I'd like to make 2 personnel announcements. Tammy Doe recently joined the Physical Planning Division as one of our summer associates. She hails from Springfield, Virginia, and she has just completed her 3rd year at Virginia Tech in the Landscape Architecture program. And finally, after 30-plus years of federal and district government service, including more than 13 years at NCPC, Support Services Specialist and Community Planner Stephanie Brown retired in May. We thank Stephanie for her service to the agency, and we wish her well in her retirement. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much. We will indeed miss Ms. Brown. Agenda item number 3 is the legislative update. Ms. Schuyler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 3 items to report. The first is House H.R. 863, which is a bill to establish a commission to study the potential creation of a National Women's Museum. This bill passed the House on May 7th and was sent to and received by the Senate on May 8th. The second item is a bill to amend the National Law Enforcement Museum Act to extend its termination date. The termination date has now been extended for 3 years until I'm sorry, I have it till May 17 and May of 2017, and it became, I'm sorry, 16, November of 2016. It passed the House in April, it passed the Senate in May, and it was signed by the President. It is now public law. The third item of interest is H.R. 4489, which is the World War I Memorial Act of 2014. And this particular bill redesignates Pershing Park in the District of Columbia down near the John Wilson office building as the National World War I Memorial, and it authorizes the World War I Centennial Commission to enhance the existing park by constructing appropriate sculpture and other elements. And it was introduced in the House on April 28th of 14, and it has been referred to the House Committee on Natural Resources and the House Committee on Government Oversight and Reform. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of Ms. Schuyler? Thank you, Ms. Schuyler. Agenda item number 4A is the consent calendar, and we have 6 items on the consent calendar. Item 4A is a modification to an existing T-Mobile telecommunications facility on a water tower at the Henry A. Wallace Beltsville Agricultural Center. Item 4B is the parking meters for the National Mall. Item 4C is the District of Columbia Capital Improvement Plan for fiscal years 2015 to 2020. Agenda item 4D is the amendments to the visitors and commemoration element of the comprehensive plan. 4E is the final master plan for Joint Base Meyer-Henderson Hall. And 4F is the draft Southwest Eco District Plan addendum. Any questions on any item on the consent calendar? Hearing none, is there a motion on the consent calendar?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded, the consent calendar, the 6 items. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Before going into the open calendar, we'll note that looking ahead, being removed from today's calendar is item 6D, which is the very last one. It's the closing of certain streets, so that's no longer on today's agenda. It's been withdrawn by the applicant for the time being. Agenda item number 5A is an update of the Dwight D. Eisenhower Memorial. You'll recall at the April meeting a couple of months ago, the commission requested that the applicant, which is the National Park Service, modify the design of the memorial, however necessary, to fulfill the purposes of the Planning Act and the Commemorative Works Act, and to return every 2 months, beginning with this meeting, to provide an update on the design modifications. Today, we'll receive the first of those updates, and as previously noted to commission members, today is just sort of for information purposes and updating, and any comments we make or questions we ask are simply that. Does not constitute any official action by the commission today. For any opening remarks, I would turn it over to Mr. May with the National Park Service as the applicant.
I think we'll turn things over directly to Dan File with the Eisenhower Memorial Commission.
Mr. File, welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm the Executive Architect with the Eisenhower Memorial Commission. At the April 2014 meeting of your commission, the Eisenhower Memorial Commission was asked to report to this body every 2 months, as was stated earlier, with an update on the memorial design for General and President Eisenhower, and I am here at this time to provide that required update. The NCPC actions at its April meeting significantly altered the major elements of the memorial design. Your comments were taken most seriously by the Eisenhower Memorial Commission and by the design team. The design team subsequently explored and is currently still exploring multiple options to be responsive to your direction, especially with regard to compliance with the design principles. They have not yet reached a consensus. We will be prepared to come forward at your July meeting with a response to the comments we received in April. As we move forward, integrating responses to your comments into the memorial design, we understand you're having voted at your April meeting to remove the support building from the design, while at the same time not approving the design. The functions in the support building were included at the express request of the National Park Service. The Park Service remains convinced that the facility should be in the design when we next present to you, as it is necessary for the proper operation and maintenance of the memorial and its grounds. We are mindful that today many Americans, including the President and Commander-in-Chief, are gathering in France for the D-Day 70th anniversary commemoration. Foremost in our minds is the dwindling number of American veterans from World War II. We have a strong sense of urgency to get through your review process successfully, and we look forward to returning to speak to you in July about the memorial design. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. File. Mr. May, you have any comments, or before we lead, any questions or comments on this item from commission members? Mr. Provencio.
We're pleased to see you here to make the presentation today to fulfill the commitment that was made at the April 3rd meeting. What we'd like to do is to try to facilitate the design effort. Has there been subsequent meetings with the NCPC staff since that April 3rd meeting as the design modifications progress?
No, the team is still trying to digest that and come up with something that they feel that can be discussed with you.
So I'm assuming then, based on that response, that your plan would be to engage with NCPC staff prior to the presentation at the July meeting?
It was not clear from the direction we got in April. It seemed that we were actually supposed to come directly to you in reporting to you.
I'd like to respond to that if I could. You know, the direction from the commission was that we were to address certain design issues. And I know that the design team has been working vigorously in studying multiple options. I have not seen much of the fruit of their labors. I've had only conversations with them. At this point, I'm not sure whether there will be an opportunity to have discussions with staff before we report again in July. So, it's a difficult thing to try to figure out because we have the Commission of Fine Arts endorsing the majority of the design, and we have NCPC objecting to certain concerns, and the Park Service also has certain concerns about the design as well. So there's a lot of things that have to fall into place. I'm not surprised that there isn't anything to show just yet, but we'll see how things go from here.
Well, I guess I would just say that the fact that there are so many moving parts and disparate points of view kind of suggests that there should be consultation and communication to work through them.
We appreciate that suggestion.
Yep.
We'll do everything that we can.
Mr. Prevention?
Yes, sir, absolutely. Concur with the chairman's perspective. One of the guiding principles of NCPs is frequent, early, recurring consultations. So when folks are working in isolation and not engaging, the end product may suffer as a result. Shifting gears a little bit, I thought the guidance in the April 3rd commission action was relatively clear and explicit. Does the Eisenhower Commission have the same perspective that this is good, actionable guidance and feedback on the issues of operations and maintenance, pedestrian circulation, the 3 remaining design principles from 2006 that have not yet been fully
I don't
complied with?
recall
Are these actionable?
pedestrian circulation being a design principle per se, or maintenance. Those were comments that were made, but the design principles had, I believe, more to do with the visual right-of-way down Maryland Avenue. It had to do with the column that was deemed to be protruding into Independence Avenue, and whether or not it was obscuring or being respectful of the LBJ building.
Right.
There were these other items that you mentioned, but they were, I believe, seemed, I won't say secondary, but they weren't directly related to the design principles. But all of them are being considered by the design team.
Okay, general pushback, these are apparently much more than just comments. It specifically says request the applicant to modify the design, and then the guidance follows. So our interpretation is this is good, clear, actionable guidance that we would hope that you would take on board and process, and we'll see that reflected in the July presentation.
Hopefully you will feel that way.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Thank you, Mr. File, very much for coming to see us today. Agenda item number 6A is the draft master plan for Joint Base Anacostia Bowling. Mr. Weil?
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. This is a draft master plan submission for Joint Base Anacostia Bowling, which is located in Southeast Washington, D.C. The draft master plan is submitted by the United States Department of the Navy for review and comment. Thank you. The installation is located in Washington, D.C. at the confluence of the Anacostia and Potomac Rivers. It's approximately 966 acres in area, approximately 3.3 miles in length from north to south, and about a mile in width, or a little less than that, at its widest point. So the draft master plan was developed from the Long Range 2035 Regionally Integrated Master Program, or also called RIMP. The RIMP was developed by the Naval District Washington in 2009 to provide an integrated set of regional strategies for its installations throughout the National Capital Region. And these long-term strategies form the foundation for each of the installation master plans currently undergoing development and currently in various stages of NCPC review. So the master plan starts out with a vision statement to serve as a premier installation, providing superior customer service and administrative mission support for DoD activities in the National Capital Region and worldwide, and also to evolve the installation into a more sustainable community. The master plan submission consists of 3 parts: draft transportation management plan. The master plan itself is divided into 2 components: a short-term 5-year component, which is an inventory of funded and likely to be funded projects within the next 5 years, and a longer-term 20-year component known as the framework plan, which provides guidance to the shorter-term 5-year development program. The master plan is based on multiple guiding principles for sustainability, including compact development, multimodal circulation, energy conservation, and sustainable landscapes. And these sustainable principles are based on the Unified Facilities Criteria for Master Planning, NCPC guidelines, and other various federal mandates related to climate change, stormwater management, and sustainability under Executive Order 13514 and the 2007 Energy Independence and Security Act. So as a little planning context, there you see JBAB. That's currently the existing land use and development pattern. You will note that the installation is turned sideways, so the north is to the right, and all subsequent graphics from here on forward will have the north showing to the right. The 4 largest land uses on the installation currently are base support, family and bachelor housing, mission and administrative uses, and open space and outdoor recreation. The installation was merged back in 2010 pursuant to a 2005 Base Realignment and Closure Act. It's made up of the former NSA Anacostia, which was located in the northern portion of the installation, and the southern portion of the installation was the former Bowling Air Force Base. And so those 2 discrete installations merged, forming Joint Base Anacostia Bowling. The existing roadway network is identified as 3 levels of roadway, basically roadways. The roadways that are designed to carry the heaviest volume of traffic are shown in red. You will note that there is a primary north-south spine route through the installation connecting 2 of the gates, made up of 2 different roads, Chappie James Boulevard and Defense Boulevard. There's a secondary roadway network shown in blue, and there's a tertiary roadway network shown in green, which provides access throughout JBAB's residential neighborhoods. So in terms of actually accessing the installation, there are 5 gates. The northernmost gate is known as North Gate, located in the vicinity of the South Capitol Street Bridge. Currently, that gate is not operational. Moving south, there's First Sterling Gate, which is for employee use only, currently during business hours, 7 days a week. Arnold Gate, which is considered to be the main gate, is used for employees only, 24 hours, 7 days a week. The South Gate is for use by employees and visitors, including commercial vehicle traffic. And the very southernmost gate is for visitor and residential use, providing access to the privatized Bellevue housing complex, which makes up the very southern portion of the installation. In terms of existing transit, currently there are 6 or 7 transit routes that provide service throughout the installation, operated by the Navy and various other tenants on the installation. These routes also provide service between the installation and several off-site locations, including the Anacostia Metro Rail Station, the Navy Yard, and the Pentagon. Outside of the installation, there are several Metro bus routes with stops along the installation's edge at several of its gates. The 2 local Metro rail stations are Anacostia, which is located approximately a half-mile up First Sterling Avenue from that gate, and Congress Heights Metro Rail Station, located approximately 1.5 miles to the east of Arnold Gate. So in terms of the natural features, the installation is protected from the Anacostia and Potomac rivers by a seawall levee system. You will note that a large proportion of the installation is located within the 100-year and 500-year flood zones. The darker blue is the 100-year flood zone, and virtually all of the former NSA Anacostia installation, which is the very northern part of JBAB, is located within that 100-year floodplain. Development constraints graphic reflects both man-made and operational constraints. This really is to divide the installation up into 3 different categories, showing potential future development. The green shading shows areas on the installation that are considered ideal for development. The yellow shaded area, which is primarily made up of the areas that are prone to flooding, are sites that are developable, but the yellow shaded area is a notification to future potential tenants that there may be some additional costs involved in developing those sites, such as floodproofing a building. And lastly, the red shaded area, those sites are considered difficult or infeasible for new development. This developable area plan graphic is based on the previous development constraints graphic. This shows potential future developable sites. Each of these sites has 1 or 2 recommended land uses associated with them, as well as 3 or 4 bullets that describe potential issues or opportunities which each of the sites. And I did not include the table on this graphic. That table is included in the master plan. But merely this is just to show that the level of detail that this master plan gets into with its future long-term potential developable areas. A little more planning context. JBAB's current employee population is listed at 13,811 employees. The master plan assumes that this employee population will not increase over the next 5 years. JBAB currently has 8,259 employee parking spaces, which gives the installation a current overall parking ratio of 1 to 1.67. The master plan was also, part of the need for the master plan was currently the waterfront levee is in need of rehabilitation, recertification. So one of the things the master plan seeks to do is get attention for that potential future project, which is currently unfunded. However, that is listed in the next 5 years, and you'll see that in a later slide. Currently existing accessibility to JBAB using transit, walking, and biking is fairly poor. The master plan and TMP seek to improve that accessibility for JBAB employees. And another issue facing the installation is its land uses can be made more efficient. There are several redundant land uses between the former, the north and the south portion of the installation, which is reflective of the previous separate discrete installations that were merged together. So one of the things the master plan seeks to do is eliminate that redundancy in the land uses. And lastly, there are several federal sustainability goals that are coming up, and the master plan is designed to help the installation attain those various sustainability goals. So as I mentioned earlier, two components to the master plan. I'll start with the shorter-term 5-year development program first. So the master plan shows a series of future demolition and construction projects over the next 5 years. The larger blue circles show projects that are currently funded, which include a parking garage demolition and replacement, shown by the number 2. The number 3 is a mezzanine waterfront, kind of a recreational amenity being provided through the DC Water Project. Number 5 is representative of a parklet private mobile garden program. And number 4 symbolizes a planned future recreational vehicle park in the very southern portion of the installation. 3 future repair projects are listed in the master plan. Number 1, there is a planned, though yet still unfunded, Anacostia drainage and sewer system overhaul to help mitigate some of that flood risk in the very northern portion of the installation. Number 2 shows the levee repair and recertification project in the future in the next 5 years. And number 3 symbolizes a replacement is needed for several generators at the installation's central heating plant. The master plan shows a 10% reduction in employee parking over the next 5 years, so that would improve the parking ratio from a 1.67 to a 1.86. And the master plan lists a number of short-term 5-year transit improvements, including a shared bicycle lane network, several proposed bike share stations, a pilot ferry service, which would dock right up here at the JBAB Marina, and also a potential future shared shuttle route between St. Elizabeth's and JBAB and the nearby Anacostia Metro Rail Station. So for the longer-term 20-year framework plan, that is divided into a number of topical components, the first being the future land use. This proposes land use with the 4 largest categories of family bachelor housing, mission/administrative, which is shown in the light blue. Housing, by the way, is shown as the yellow. Mixed use, which is a new land use designation in this master plan than what currently exists, and an increase in open space and outdoor recreational space on the installation. So now I'll go through several key features of this future land use plan. So as I mentioned previously, there are a number of mixed-use areas. These are areas that are intended to make it easier to locate uses together that will help improve local connectivity on the installation and promote biking, walking, and transit use. The land use framework plan shows a central development focus area in an attempt to densify and help increase the mix of uses around the installation's existing central business district. And the land use plan reflects a 200 to 300 foot wide waterfront open space greenway extending all the way from the very northern tip of the installation adjacent to the South Capitol Street Bridge all the way down to the JBAB Marina. There's a consolidated industrial district, and consolidated housing in the south. In terms of the framework plan's access and circulation framework, there are a number of strategies included in the plan. The first strategy is to improve the installation's interface with its surrounding neighborhood, and there are 4 planned unfunded projects, gate improvement projects in the long-term framework plan component. The plan includes a strategy to strengthen the internal roadway network into more of a grid pattern, and the master plan reflects this attempt to implement that strategy through a series of 4 roadway extension projects. The intent is to improve east-west accessibility on the installation, waterfront access, and also make it more pedestrian and bicycle friendly. The last strategy included in the access and circulation is to restrict vehicular access along several routes to bicycles and pedestrians only throughout the future development focus area to try to improve the urban design and walkability of that area. The 20-year framework plan includes a multimodal circulation component. This not only includes the previously mentioned 5-year projects, it also adds to that DC streetcar service, potential ferry water taxi service, which would dock at the JBAB Marina, potential much more robust potential internal shuttle service that will operate at 15 to 30-minute headways. And this multimodal circulation component shows 3 identified multimodal transit hubs to try to improve mobility and accessibility throughout the installation and between the installation and the surrounding neighborhood and city. Stormwater management installation-wide component again includes a number of stormwater-related strategies to upgrade the aging infrastructure found in the northern portion of the installation by repairing the underground sewer and stormwater system, and also to rehabilitate and recertify the levee. It includes a strategy to promote a more integrated natural system with green infrastructure consisting of green streetscapes, retrofitting large parking areas with low-impact development features, relocating some existing buildings that are currently located close to the waterfront to other portions of the installation further inland, and also to possibly retrofit some of the larger area industrial buildings with green roofs, as shown by number 7. In terms of open space and outdoor recreation, again, this component includes a number of strategies to be implemented by specific planned long-term projects in the future, creating a green space area in the very northern portion of the installation, reconnecting the levee trail so that it's a continual trail all the way from the very northern portion of the installation down to the marina, and to enhance a network of streetscapes to try to encourage walking and biking throughout the installation. Strategy to create new active use nodes. Again, this is supported by a number of planned future projects such as the RV park, a designated community garden area, the construction of an overlook plaza, and also recognition that by this number 8, adjacent to the arena, that's a potential future 2M site. So the master plan submission included a draft transportation management plan. The TMP proposes a long-term 1-to-2 parking ratio goal for employees. The TMP shows a number of existing mode shares for JBAB employees. You can see that a vast majority of JBAB employees currently commute using single occupant vehicles due to the spread of where JBAB employees live throughout the region. And the TMP proposes a series of mode share goals in order to attain a long-term 1-to-2 employee parking ratio. So for example, the TMP proposes to reduce the 81% SOV mode share down to a 55% and to increase all the other non-SOV mode shares. So staff analyzed the TMP and master plan. NCPC has review authority over the master plan pursuant to the National Capital Planning Act. Staff used the NCPC comprehensive plan as a tool to weigh the master plan and TMP against using these comprehensive plan elements. And staff divided its analysis into 3 different categories. The first set of basically my analysis will address the master plan's organization and structure. The second portion of my analysis will address the short-term component. And the third portion of my analysis will address the longer-term 20-year component. And just to give you a heads up, the executive director's recommendation follows this same structure, where the executive director's recommendation is categorized using these 3 different groupings. So staff strongly supports the master plan organization in its 2 component parts, a shorter term 5-year component, which includes funded and soon to be funded, likely to be funded projects, as well as a longer term 20-year component to provide guidance for the shorter term development program. Staff also supports the general framework plan strategies, many of which are based on these sustainable strategies shown before you. In terms of the development program, staff notes a 0 growth employee population assumption. Staff notes that the master plan proposes a 10% employee parking reduction in the short-term 5-year component. Staff notes that this short-term component does include both funded and likely to be funded projects. Lastly, staff strongly supports the reconstruction and recertification of the waterfront levee, since it has a big impact to future costs of future development on the installation. In terms of the longer-term framework plan, staff strongly supports many of the strategies, including the establishment of a 200 to 300 foot wide waterfront buffer area, establishing a central development focus area, establishing an area set aside for community gardens, and the master plan and TMP both include a number of comprehensive travel demand management strategies and programs, and there were a number of other elements as well that staff really recognized leading to a fairly strong master plan. However, staff does not support the proposed TMP's long-term 1-to-2 employee parking space ratio based on a number of reasons. This part of the city there are a lot of planned developments and planned transportation improvements in this part of the city, and so staff did not feel it appropriate to settle for relax the NCPC recommended 1-to-4 employee parking ratio for this part of the city, and allow the master plan TMP to use a 1-to-2 long-term parking ratio goal. Staff had felt it appropriate to include several requests to the Navy regarding the framework plan. Number one, in support of further reducing employee parking, staff felt one potential action that could be taken is to remove all the employee parking throughout the central development focus area. not only to work towards the 1-to-4 parking ratio, but also to improve potential developable area, and also improve the urban design and reinforce the walkability and bikeability of that area. Number two, staff felt it appropriate to request that the additional waterfront lot located in the extreme southwest portion of the installation be removed to further help reduce impervious surface on the installation, and also to further expand the waterfront open space area. And lastly, staff requests that the Arnold Gate be used for visitors in the future rather than South Gate due to the gate's better proximity to a future proposed multimodal transit hub and DC streetcar service. Lastly, staff recommends regarding the framework plan that noting that the master plan proposes to relocate the commercial vehicle inspection operation from where it exists today down at the South Gate, adjacent to the first Sterling Gate. Staff recognizes that that would likely result in an increase of commercial vehicular traffic through that gate, and recognizing that there's a major access point to the St. Elizabeth's campus located right here, a short way up First Sterling Avenue. Staff feels that it's very, very important to continue coordination of this planned project with St. Elizabeth's, GSA, NCPC, and JBAP. Staff also would like to request the Navy continue its travel demand management efforts in trying to attain a longer-term 1-to-4 parking ratio, and recognizes that as a team effort, a coordination effort should include WMATA, DDOT, St. Elizabeth's and GSA, NCPC, and the Naval Research Laboratory. So here's the actual executive director's recommendation. I'll kind of fly through these if you don't mind. These are, again, divided up into the same categories. Basically, the executive director supports the overarching organization of the master plan into a short-term 5-year and 20-year component, and also requests continued coordination between the Navy and NCPC from here on into the future. Staff notes the short-term component includes funded and likely to be funded projects. Note that staff notes, or the executive director notes, that the master plan is based on a 0 employee population growth assumption, and that the master plan will work to reduce employee parking by approximately 10% over the short term. And furthermore, the executive director supports the rehab and recertification of the waterfront levee in light of the installation's history of flooding. The executive director strongly supports the following general strategies to highlight the master plan and its comprehensive nature, including the expansion of the waterfront open space area, establishment of a comprehensive and unified shuttle system within the installation, the establishment of a central development focus area, designation of community gardens areas, and a number of TDM programs, including bike share stations and direct Metro bus and/or DC circulator service actually onto the installation. The executive director does not support the proposed parking ratio of 1 to 2 employee spaces, since the master plan and TMP do not justify deviation from the transportation elements prescribed 1 to 4 long-term parking ratio goal. The executive director requests the Navy make the following specific changes to the long-range framework plan to consider using Arnold Gate for visitor access rather than the South Gate, to prioritize removal of the parking lot in the southwest portion of the installation, as well as employee parking throughout the central development focus area. And the executive director supports future consultation regarding the potential relocation of the truck inspection facility between the Navy, GSA, NCPC, and the St. Elizabeth's, And the executive director supports future planning and coordination for future travel demand management programs and services between JBAB, the Naval Research Laboratory, St. Elizabeth's, Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, NCPC, and DDOT. And that concludes my presentation. I'm available for questions, and I believe JBAB has representation here as well.
Right, before we get in, thank you, Mr. Weil. Before we get into Q&A, would a JBAB rep like to make any comments or simply be available for questions? Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Kristen Bukotic, and I am JBAB's Public Work Officer. I'm in the Air Force, as you can see, running a Navy organization. So we're a truly joint organization. I've been there less than a year, so relatively new to the base. But I'd like to say, first and foremost, thank you for having us today. Thank you to the commissioners. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And I'd like to do a special thanks to Mr. Weil. He's been working between himself and our planners at NAFAC Washington. They've established a really unique partnership and great working relationship. And as I've gotten familiar with a lot of the long-range vision, I actually live in D.C. As well on Capitol Hill, and so I'm a little bit familiar with where we're going in the district as well from a resident perspective. But seeing the partnership and the progress that we've made in a short period of time, I think that is going to be instrumental in not only JBAB's long-range vision, but that kind of partnership is going to be needed for the long-term, overall vision for a District of Columbia. So thank you there, and thank you to my planners. As a public works officer, having just come to the organization, the first thing that I would say is that it's a young organization as a joint base. So in the last few years, we've actually matured a lot, and I think that you'll see that, and you may have seen that in our master plan between the one that was presented in 2010 to this one. Obviously, anytime you take two services together, you have a clashing, one, of cultures, two, of how you plan, organize, and equip an installation, and basically how you overall run installations. And so it's been quite a learning process, I think, for both services, the organization as a whole, and of course, creating that kind of joint long-range vision. And we're pretty proud of this master plan. We think that it's that, again, it makes a lot of progress and kind of meets a lot of the your intentions for what you're looking for from JBAB. The other thing that I did want to say is we all know that in this period of kind of fiscally constrained environment, over the next 20 years, we have a long way to go, and we're going to have to continue to work creative solutions to obtain a lot of these initiatives that we have. So one of the things that Mr. Weil did present, because it was in the draft master plan, was that for our long-term framework, as well as the transportation master plan, it says a parking ratio of 1 to 2. And we have a new installation commander, and we've been in some pretty in-depth discussions over the past couple months. He's only been there about 2 months. And we are planning to update the transportation management plan and the long-term framework plan to meet that 4 to 1, or 1 to 4, I should say. So again, a lot's going to have to happen in order, because Anacostia, our joint base Anacostia Bowling, is kind of, we have that river boundary, and we are kind of separated from the city center. A lot is going to be dependent on local, state, and federal transportation initiatives, but looking forward, it is very important, and we agree that, as a military organization and a governmental organization, that we have to be good stewards of the environment. We're just as responsible to have to reduce congestion, obviously reduce air pollution and the various things, and do our part, and we want to do that part, obviously, with fiscal constraints, and, as these initiatives kind of take shape over the next 20 years, we're gonna do, at least our part to try to get there. And so, again, with plan development in the area, a lot of it is contingent upon, what can be done in the next 5, 10, 15, 20s, but you as planners know that, of course. So other than that, the remainder of the comments will be taken in consideration for the final draft, and that's all I have for you all.
Thank you very much, and thank you for commenting on the good working relationship that we have. And we owe a lot of that to Commissioner Provenza, who has been working for quite some time to increase the level of dialogue and partnership and planning.
Yes,
so
sir.
It's working. Questions or comments? Mr. Dixon?
Yeah,
Colonel Dixon?
about 3 things. First of all, the parking that you're talking about removing maybe at the marina is also where people stage their boat drops. Is that going to be accommodated, or what's going to happen there?
So we're definitely going to have to look into that entire arena. One of the areas that was circled actually is a parking lot that's adjacent to the Navy Research Lab, and it's actually not used for parking. So I was kind of surprised. I didn't catch that in the draft slides. It's actually it's for some storage for that. So again, that parking lot was a different parking lot than the one that was shown. So, but basically in that whole area, we're definitely going to have to look at as a whole, and as we continue to develop the waterfront. And
Yeah, I guess my specific question is this. I used to have a sailboat. I dropped out there a lot over there, so I know the place very well.
Yes, sir.
It's in my neighborhood too, in Anacostia. But most of the time, the boats were dropped, and then you parked your car on that lot. And I wonder what you're going to do with the towing vehicle to go a distance and have to walk back. Is that going to be thought through? I'm
oh,
sure it will be
absolutely,
thought
sir.
through, but-
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. Well, I just want to raise it.
Yes,
'cause,
sir.
Some boating people might want to find out how they're going to get their
And
vehicle
that's,
away
of
once
course-
they drop the boat.
Yes, sir. And that's
Want to walk a mile back.
a lot of folks don't think
that.
that's important, but because we're one of the closest military units,
Yeah.
in the National Capital Region, that's a huge MWR asset and quality of life issue.
The other thing, the trolley, which is a big issue in our neighborhood, has it been thought of how you're going to connect? Because right now, the tracks would have to cross 295. Is that something that's being thought about, so you can get it over to you guys?
Yes, sir. Sir, the Transportation Task Force is actually looking through that. There's a couple different initiatives that we're potentially looking at doing, whether there be a stop at the Firth Sterling or, connecting to Arnold Gate and adjusting our shuttle services as well. So,
But there's no thought about how to get the tracks. Obviously, crossing 295 would be complicated, so
yes, sir.
I don't think
I'll
that,
make that note and make sure that our Transportation
I
Council
don't know
looks
they
into
can be
it.
overcome, but I know that, at any
Yes, sir.
rate. And the last question I have, Navy was very good on the other side of the river to create a walkway from 11th Street all the way down to the baseball park. And it facilitates biking, just usage. And their gates they have for access to the secured areas within that Navy complex. This area is going to be completely, your side is going to be completely out of the reach of anybody except folks who are on the base. I know gates and access points are tricky and costly maybe, but it would really do a lot for us to connect the park, the Anacostia Park, along that riverfront like they have on the other side, which is now tied into bike paths and all kinds of things. And I know that the secured gates are camered and monitored, and so that if you work there, you can go through the gate, go to your assignment, or you can come out and enjoy the water
Yes, sir.
with the rest of the community.
Yes, sir.
So has there been any thought about that at all?
So there's been some, I think, preliminary discussions, but I don't know as in terms of kind of the long-term plan. I think obviously the levee repair project, and there's a lot that's going to be happening on the waterfront. But I'll certainly make that
You
note and
understand what
make
I'm
sure.
suggesting?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
On the other side, they did it.
Yes,
I
sir.
was shocked to see you go right along the Navy Yard.
Yes, sir, and
from
it's
11th
actually,
Street
it's
all the
really
way to
nice.
the ball park.
Yes, sir.
And bike paths have now been connected completely on the other side. And it would be too bad maybe not to have the same opportunity with this land in your base presence. But
Yes, sir.
thank you very much.
You're welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon. Mr. Hart?
Yes, as I recall, the last time this project came before us, you guys got chewed up pretty bad, and I took exception to it because I thought that what was being done was an appropriate look at the future impacts of development in a JBAB where there was going to be an increase in mission. I think it's a nice job. The master plan, as it was explained, I think covers a lot of the bases. The one thing I didn't hear anything about was one thing that was a pretty hot issue at the last session, and that was external traffic impacts. Now, I was really pleased to hear that you're going to try to meet the 1-to-4 parking ratio, because that immediately comes back to those traffic impacts at all the gates. Does this master plan begin to look at off-site transportation improvements to accommodate the changes in the traffic?
I think what the master plan looks at, right now it looks at, it considers planned improvements. I don't believe it gets into that level of detail. For example, we need to improve this intersection to accommodate any additional traffic, or we need a future, satellite parking lot. It doesn't get into the level of detail that maybe a traffic impact study would get into, and figure out what kind of off-site improvements would need to be made.
That would seem to be an appropriate thing moving forward, as this master plan is updated, that transportation, traffic impact studies would be done as part of those updates. Second thing, the levee is being repaired to meet what level of flood hazard? Is it only a 100-year flood?
I believe the only thing the master plan says is it's being recertified, it's being brought back up to U.S. Army Corps of Engineers standards.
Yes, sir. We're actually currently in a study at the moment to determine all the requirements for what would go into that project. So the study is actually ongoing. It's due to be complete this summer, and we'll be able to then determine kind of the requirements from there. But we've been working hand in hand with Army Corps of Engineers.
There is a global warming discussion going on, and the rise of sea level has been recorded historically. The historic 100-year flood protection is a 1% per year possibility. New Orleans learned that 1% protection doesn't always help. So I would encourage the JBAB planners to look into raising the levee to alleviate any exposure to, these kinds of flood hazards. A little bit of prevention will pay you off enormously if you look at the costs of an impact of flood.
Yes, sir. We're actually producing a couple different options, so that kind of more immediate repair, and then, of course, a much more expensive option, which will probably take a few years to do, but that would be more of a repair by replacement, type situation.
So overall, well done. Bravo, Zulu. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. May?
Okay, so I have a couple of questions. Your neighbor to the north on the other side of the bridge is the National Park Service, at least currently. And we have a levee running through that area as well, which we struggle to maintain to the appropriate standard. And I've been told over the years that part of the purpose of that being there is to protect the base. And do you know if that in fact is the case, and are you looking at that question as you study your own levee?
Copy that, sir. I don't know, I don't have the engineer here that's actually working that, so I'll take that for note. And
Yeah,
so
I
we'll
mean,
have
I
to
would
get back to
definitely
you on
make
that.
sure of it, because we have real issues with maintaining ours. I'd hate to see you repair the sections that are yours and then have the one, I mean, if we have a
Absolutely.
component of it that's not up to the same standard, it would be problematic in the future. If you need to discuss it with the park who manages it,
Yes,
you
sir.
can contact Frank Young, who is the acting deputy superintendent. If you just call the main number that you can find, you can get a hold of him.
Copy that, sir.
Okay, thank you. So on the streetcar question, I actually thought the streetcar does cross over to the other side of South Capitol. and that-
Tracks are there, but I'm not sure Charlie's going, I don't know.
Well, there's like a test track along there, and then there's a facility that we visited there. So is it actually the existing line as planned, or the existing line, or what is planned, does it actually come very close to the base?
Yeah, it's right next to the base. I believe that test line will be incorporated, it will be extended up, and that will be included in the streetcar network. And you're right, I believe it actually crosses South Capitol Street.
Show that on
I-
the map, so it's easier.
The test line definitely crosses South Capitol and actually goes right along the fence line. In fact, we had put in a request to actually increase the height of the fence, a real
yeah.
estate action, for security reasons. And then, of course, there's an easement associated with which we're working through right now.
Okay. That's helpful to see. One of the things I noted in my review of this report is that there's a lot of color in this report that would have been very helpful to see when we reviewed it. It was very hard to review in black and white, so that's just a note for staff for future
Even
discussions.
this color could be brighter.
That's true, but this is better than what we have in our black and white.
Yes.
So, I mean, are we seeing it there in the lower right where it's coming across along First Sterling, right?
Yes, sir. So right here?
Yeah,
It comes across, and then I think it goes down to probably about, and then it just dead ends.
Right.
It's not a station necessarily right there, but it is coming along there, which is why we needed the fence a little bit higher.
okay. So I'm curious about what the ultimate plan is for the streetcar in that area. I mean, I know that the future, or the immediate future of the streetcar is somewhat in question, given the funding situation in the district, although that's not, the dust has not settled on that yet. But I would be curious to know whether it's envisioned that the line would actually extend that far down. I do think that would be highly beneficial, given the number of people who work there. By the way, Lieutenant Colonel, I'm sorry, I missed your name.
Kristen Bakotic?
Bakotic. So I'm just curious, is this your actual workstation? You work on the base?
I do, yes, sir.
And so how do you commute from Capitol Hill?
When it's nice out, I actually ride my bike.
Excellent.
I do.
I was hoping for that answer.
It's just bad, and today, since I was wearing this uniform, I didn't specifically, but I
You
do.
know, I
live
came
right-
today in my suit on my bike.
On your bike?
Yes.
That's impressive, sir. Impressive. But I do, and I'm an annual member of the bike share, so I use that all around. And so I'm a huge proponent of it. It's just a matter of, hopefully some of that community development right outside the gate will continue to improve over, the next few years. And if we end up getting that bike lane extended down South Capitol, I think it'll be a huge help as well.
Right. Well, and I know Berry Farm is teeing up for redevelopment shortly, so that'll be a big improvement. Now, and I also know that, I've tried to do the crossing on South Capitol Street Bridge, which is not very good. But do you come by 11th Street? Because that is a better crossing.
I do both.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And of course, the 11th Street gives you the opportunity of going through the park
It does.
as well. And I will comment also on the path, the trail along the Navy Yard that connects to the stadium, which I rode very recently. It's a great thing to have, but it is tough on bikes at the moment because of it's an uneven surface and there are lots of gaps, and it's, if you're not really watching, you can easily get a wheel stuck in those gaps. And so, that's not your domain, but I think that's the next one.
Right.
Over to you, Rich.
I think that's all I had to say. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. The thing that concerns me the most is the levy follow-up.
Copy
So,
that.
I appreciate it.
Ms. McCarthy and then Mr. Provenza.
I was thinking along the same lines of Mr. Hardin, but wondering even more broadly, how realistic is it to even plan on increased investment in this area, given that so much of it is already in the 100-year floodplain at our current level, our current water levels, and with such alarming projections on the effects of climate change? Does it make sense to retain a secure facility here so close to the possibility of being flooded? Or doesn't it make sense, particularly because it's an Air Force base without an airstrip. It's a Navy base without an airstrip, and a Navy base without any kind of major docking station. So it's like, it doesn't seem like there's an integral military reason to have it there, and it seems like the hazards or the potential danger and loss of all this investment and potential loss of life or whatever else, is it really worth continuing to invest here or to think about moving it?
Ma'am, I think that, when you look at kind of how we were at least condensing from the Anacostia side over to the former bowling side, where the elevation is, it's not that much greater, but at one point it's actually up 60 feet higher than on the lower Anacostia side. And that's kind of why we put some of that flex use, that mixed use kind of downtown area, kept it on the bowling side there. I do think that the close proximity to actual DC, downtown DC, is so vital for so many of our tenant units that are on the base, many of our agencies, and the support that we provide to them, I think is very important. And I think that proximity needs to remain, close to the government, and not you can even tell a difference between JBAB and Andrews, actually, just because and it's only, 20 minutes up the road. It's pretty interesting and fascinating. I've been in the National Capital Region for about 8 years now, but, In terms of, the missions on the base, with Defense Intelligence Agency and HMX and Secret Service, and we have a medical component that services the National Capital Region. Some of those type things, WACA and various support functions are critical mission sets. And you want to keep them on federal land, and you want to keep them close. And so I think that JBAB actually became, I think the number reported in the plan is 70. It changes as pretty quickly, but a number of supported commanders, as we call our tenant units, became I don't want to say a breeding ground because I don't know if that's the right term, for all those kind of catch-all for folks that were in leased space. And when the government was trying to basically become a little bit more fiscally responsible and get it on military reservations and government property, we have quite a few cats and dogs in these facilities that you aren't even aware of. The historians on the building with all of our with a lot of the key art, and there's a lot on the base that a lot of folks aren't aware of. So,
Right, well, I remember when we were considering the master plan, when I was on the commission before, and we took a tour, and it did seem to me that there were a lot of cats and dogs, and A, cats and dogs that didn't necessarily need to be there, and B, I hear your argument about its proximity to downtown, but I also see the analysis about the difficult accessibility, and that is why 80% of the access to the base is by single occupant automobile. So it's like so near and yet so far.
Yes, ma'am.
In terms of its proximity. It kind of made me wonder, because I don't think that I see in the report, what's the percentage breakdown of employees who work at JBAB who live on site and those who commute? I probably had it in there, and I
I don't
just
have those
missed it.
exact numbers. But there's actually it's a pretty high percentage actually that don't work actually on the base, that live on the base, that work around the National Capital Region. So, but I'll take that for note, and we can get that number for you.
I see, okay. Because what seemed to me to make sense in terms of your consideration of transportation management, but also if you're going to stay there in future development of the base, then some kind of live near your work program, it would seem to me would make sense as part of your planning framework. As Mr. May said, the whole Berry Farm development next to St. Elizabeth's is going to be redeveloped as a mixed income facility with some beautiful public facilities, a great recreation center, and new schools. And there's a number of other redevelopment sites around there. So there would be the possibility of some pretty nice and new housing, and that housing would be more likely to be built if there were a program at the base incentivizing people to look in the area around there, which would then, of course, improve your parking ratio and your whole transportation
Yes, ma'am.
issues.
We have, in terms of housing residents too, we have over 42 flag officers that live on base, as well as the DV quarters for flag officers to stay when they come to the National Capital Region, to stay in government quarters. And so folks like Admiral Papp, the Coast Guard 4-star, actually lives on JBAB. I mean, there's a lot of folks that live on JBAB that actually commute off base and go to other installations or federal agencies.
Mm-hmm. The report called for, one of the transportation measures were looking at shuttles between JBAB and St. E's. Was it just assumed in there that would also include stops at Anacostia Metro and Congress Heights Metro?
Yes, ma'am. This is something that we're still going to continue to work through the Transportation Task Force. For the long-range vision, when you look at some of the key transportation nodes, such as the Dash bus or various things that go in the Pentagon, maybe long-term there's an opportunity for, some of those buses to go straight into there, and where we have a shuttle that goes back and forth, kind of a circulator, if you will, between the Metro and the transportation node and JBAB, and maybe where the streetcar drops, and maybe where, potentially, I think it was, they just publicly announced that they approved a grant for the ferry for the study for the ferry service. I think it came out on June 2nd. So, I mean, that's another thing that we're gonna have to look into is if we do a ferry service, then how do we, get folks to where they need to from there as well? So that's all gonna be looked at by the Transportation Task Force.
Okay. And I guess my last question was, an RV park?
Yeah. For retired military to drive to, park the RV and visit DC.
Yeah, the
So
RV
it's like
park.
you run your own KOA kind of thing?
Yeah, the RV park will have a small community center and electric and water hookups and, kind of recreational amenities. We just reviewed an RV park actually down at Fort Belvoir within the last year or two. And it seems like, it's a trend. I think there's certain military bases with the resources, the land possibly, are starting to develop RV parks for military retirees.
Oh.
So it's a place to stay.
Okay. Well, I would just second Mr. Dixon's comments about the importance of really looking at a bike trail
Yes, ma'am.
along there. If you look at, the plan for the Anacostia Riverwalk on the other side is to go from the Arboretum all the way to Georgetown, across the river. You've got the fabulous Mount Vernon Trail all through Alexandria, and it just seems like this would be a natural, especially with Washington Harbor and the rest of the redevelopment of downtown Anacostia, great recreation for you guys and recreation for everybody else.
Yes, ma'am.
Can I ask a quick question about the levy? This is just a follow-up to your questions. When the Park Service was working with the Corps of Engineers to construct the levee closure structure on 17th Street on the mall, along the mall, and as we work with them to make improvements at that levee structure, we actually have not been aiming for a 100-year flood protection. It's based on some other calculation. I forget what it was. It was 700,000 CFM or I don't know, cubic feet per minute. I forget what the exact measure was, but it translated to about 186-year flood. And I'm wondering if that's the case here, whether you're planning for something that's actually significantly more than 100-year flood. Does anybody know the answer to that?
Sir, I don't believe we have anyone here that knows that exact, but we can get that to you. I'll make
Yeah,
it
I mean, I think it's important to know, I think, for NCPC staff to know.
Mr. Prevention.
A couple of comments. First, thank you for Mr. Weil for the comprehensive report that we have come to expect. Thank you also for coming to represent the JBAB Commander, Captain Frank Mays. We appreciate that. I think there's many complementary things, echoing some of the words of the other commissioners. The 10 master planning principles, the framework within the overall 20-year strategic framework plan that has resourcing elements, sustainability elements. I think that's a good fit there. We're encouraged also by the improved relations with the folks at St. Eve's. Remember early on that they were somewhat contentious, and there were some folks at Homeland Security writing memos to that regard. I think that's all been has subsided. To press a little bit more on the levees, interested not only in the adjacent Park Service levees to the north, but also the Blue Plains seawall and levee project to the south. Hopefully, we need to do things on a regional and expanded basis. So, in my experience, sea level rise and storms always seek the lowest and the weakest part of that armor. Particularly challenging when you've got almost 3 miles of coastline there and waterfront to protect. Some of the principles that we talk about at NCPC are things like deforestation, stormwater management, parking ratios, human scale, walkability, those types of things. I think it's important to confirm that the JBAB is really a challenging site. When you've got a long linear site that's approximately half a mile deep and almost 3 miles long, very little change in elevation. You mentioned the 60 feet on the bowling side. Those are the proximity or the distance, if you will, from Metro Rail. Those are all tough things to handle. On the sea level rise, I was looking at the 2009 FEMA hurricane flooding map, and it shows that approximately 15% under Hurricane Category 1 would be flooded, 15% of the installation. And it goes all the way up to 80% flooding at Category 4 hurricane, and that doesn't factor in the sea level rise. There's a really active NCPC group led by Ms. Tarse on climate adaptation planning that I think will help inform the overall planning that we have here throughout the National Capital Region. One of the products that I've seen produced already is a flooding profile for DC that shows flooding of low-lying areas as early as 2018. So that's just around the corner. One of the commissioners, I think, mentioned the return on investment. I've heard numbers of 4 to 1, as much as 7 to 1 return on investment when you build levees as opposed to trying to repair flooded facilities. Last comment had to do with there's a request in here that the JBAB folks update NCPC at 2-year intervals. Is that doable? It seems somewhat burdensome to update the plan at that frequency.
Yes, sir, it would be, just only for the sheer fact of that, requirements change. I think the 5-year was kind of on the FIDUP cycle and along those lines. Right now, especially with some of the sequestration, we have the hiring freeze, and we're actually quite short-staffed as well. But I think on a normal basis, we would request to stay on that 5-year kind of cycle. And then, of course, individual project considerations, we would do the normal review process.
Last comment had to do with, in my experience at installation and garrison level, you do these master plans, and then they can all be wiped out with a decision at a higher headquarters, such as relocating the base or changing the mission sets that are there. That's exactly what the 4-letter word BRAC is all about, base realignment and closure. We know that the department has requested approval from Congress for early rounds of BRAC. Congress has disapproved those requests, but there are some, if you will, intermediate BRAC planning efforts underway.
Yes, sir.
So perhaps JBAB would be impacted by that. Time will tell.
Yes, sir.
So, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. Any further questions or?
I want to just repeat 3 things. One, I see tracks, but I want to be sure they're not just test tracks. Hopefully they'll come across and be useful
Yes,
for
sir.
us because it helps out the community as a whole. 2, I really think access to the waterfront, like they have on the other side. If you're talking about ferries, et cetera, you're going to have more ridership, more usage of that if the area is available to the public at large and not just to the military facility. And the other thing is I hope we don't get bracked out because this is in our neighborhood. Everybody's fighting for bases and things to stay in their community. There was a lot of folks in Anacostia who see this present, your presence, as a useful presence that will have benefits that will spin off. So I hope you can stay there and hope you build a wall high enough so folks don't flood. Even people who live there don't want to get flooded, okay?
We can issue water wings if we have to.
Pardon me?
Yeah. Oh, Mr. Miller.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had one quick question. I was pleased to hear that you are a district resident. I assume that's a very small percentage currently of the people who commute to base. Is it? Do you know what the percentage is?
I don't have the exact percentage, but most of the folks live in Maryland and Virginia.
Is it over 80% live in Maryland, Virginia?
Sorry, I don't know the exact percentage.
Yeah. Well, I would just follow up on what Commissioner McCarthy said about the live near your work incentives. There's a lot of housing being developed in this part of the city. St. Elizabeth East Campus. How many housing units does that have just by itself, let alone the Barry Farm that you mentioned and all the stuff that's happening around Congress Heights, and that would be one way. And then there are all these transportation improvements that you're working on that'll make it more accessible. And so to the extent you can have live near your work incentives as part of your travel demand management or transportation management program, I think it'll work out very well.
Thank you.
Hearing no other questions, before us is the draft master plan, the final still to come. The question before us is EDR comments on the draft master plan. Is there a motion on the EDR?
Motion.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of the EDR, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Sorry, I don't know if I'm breaking protocol, but I did just find the table for that information. 43% Virginia, 41.8% Maryland, 14.8% DC. So right around there. And then 0.2 North Carolina, 0.2 West Virginia, if you could believe it.
Well, maybe when we see you next, those numbers will rise for the district.
Copy that, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Agenda item number 6B is the draft master plan for the Washington Navy Yard, and we have Mr. Detman. Mr. Weil, thank you very much for your work.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. Staff will present to you its recommendation for another Navy master plan, this one, a draft master plan for the Washington Navy Yard. Washington Navy Yard is located in the District of Columbia in the southeast quadrant. You can see here in this image, this larger dot here noting the location of the Washington Navy Yard in relation to its location within the district and in the surrounding region. You can also see on this map several other dots noting the location of other naval installations, which, as you know, the Navy is undergoing a region-wide installation master planning process, which is updating several installation master plans throughout the region, which each are informed by a much larger region-wide integrated master programming exercise called the RIMP, which informs individual strategies at the installation level. The Washington Navy Yard, you can see here in this aerial photo outlined in red. As of today, it currently encompasses approximately 79 acres. It's bound by M Street on the north, 11th Street, and the 11th Street Bridge Complex that you can see under construction here on the east, the Anacostia River along the south, as well as the Yard's redevelopment of the Yard's neighborhood to the west. Over time, the function, mission, and the size of the Navy Yard has evolved substantially since its original inception in the late 1700s. Initially, it was established as a shipbuilding yard and a maintenance facility, and it sort of transitioned over time to a production facility during World War I, research and testing during World War II, and then following World War II began its sort of progress or evolution into a large administrative center. I noted that the Navy Yard at one time was much larger, one time encompassing the area immediately to the west, which is currently under redevelopment. But in 1962, it was determined that that much land was no longer necessary for the function of the Navy Yard, and that portion of the Navy Yard was surplus to the General Services Administration. Since the 1970s, the Navy Yard has taken on a lot of administrative office space. Beginning in the 1970s, there was a big effort to consolidate a lot of lease space onto federally owned land, which was noted in the last presentation. And the Navy Yard was one of those installations that received a lot of that office space. In addition, multiple rounds of BRAC also resulted in several employees and a lot of office space being located to the Navy Yard. Much like the JBAB master plan, the Navy Yard master plan is guided by an overall vision statement. The Navy Yard serves as the flag deck of the Navy, and it's the most important administrative center in the country. The master plan builds upon the historic heritage of the site as a premier installation with distinctive headquarters, first-class office space, attractive green spaces, and then enabling a high-quality workplace environment. The overall content structure of the master plan is the exact same as the JBAB master plan that you just saw. There's a 5-year short-term component consisting of an inventory of known funded projects that have already gone through the DoD's lengthy budgeting process. There's the 20-year long-term framework plan, which is composed of a series of overlays that kind of put together, provide that long-range planning scenario that's intended to guide future programming, planning, and budgeting decisions by the DoD. And then there's also a TMP. The Navy Yard Master Plan is based on the same set of 10 guiding principles as the JBAB Master Plan, so I won't go through those for you, as you've already been presented. With regard to the overall Master Plan organization and content structure, you'll note in our EDR that staff's very supportive of this. We think that the 5-year short-term component gives the Commission a good idea of what to expect in terms of specific projects that are coming forward for review. And then the long-term component is provides the commission with a really good overall context with regard to the long-term vision for the Navy Yard and how it'll guide future planning and budgeting decisions. Looking at some of the emerging conditions at the Navy Yard, you can see in this aerial photo that it's very densely populated, very densely developed according to a fairly regular pattern of streets that was put into place in the very early in the history of the Navy Yard as sort of as an extension of the grid across the base for purposes of moving materials on and off the base very efficiently, as well as in between buildings. In terms of its surrounding, it's kind of hemmed in between the 11th Street Bridge Complex, the Anacostia River, as well as the Southeast-Southwest Freeway to the north. And just sort of generally speaking about the surrounding development pattern of the neighborhood, the surrounding neighborhood is evolving substantially. As I said, a large mixed-use neighborhood is being developed to the west. You have Capitol Hill immediately to the north, and then to the east, there's some development going on there over by Maritime Plaza for some, I believe, some conference space and some hotel space that'll be located at the foot of Virginia Avenue. I noted that currently the Navy Yard is primarily an administrative center. An administrative office space composes the largest percentage of land area at the Navy Yard, being approximately 35 or 36 of the 79 acres that make up the base. That's approximately 46% of the installation. Other large land uses on the installation include parking, which is approximately 12 acres or 16% of the installation, which is spread across 3 parking garages, here on the east, one on the west, and then building 405 down in the southeast, as well as a collection of surface parking lots, which are down along the southern boundary of the installation. Parks and open space also make up a fairly high component of the Navy Yard, 9 acres or approximately 12% of the installation. In addition, there's a fairly large cultural component that exists on the Navy Yard. The United States National Museum of the U.S. Navy exists kind of in the central portion of the Navy Yard in Building 76, Building 70, and then a collection of administrative buildings that serve as support space and storage space for the Navy Yard, or for the Navy Master Plan, or Navy Museum, sorry. In terms of existing transportation and vehicular circulation across the installation, as I noted, there's a fairly regular system of a grid network that provides vehicular and pedestrian circulation throughout the installation. In terms of parking, you can see here the 3 parking garages that exist on the base. In total, there's approximately 5,000 parking spaces on the base, of which about 4,777 are set aside for employee parking, and 3,600 total are located in the existing parking garages. Over time, the base was developed and to a large extent built on fill along the Anacostia River. There is some topography as you make your way north on the installation, with some steep slopes located in the northeast, as well as in this location here, just to the west of the historic parade ground, which is located here. But as you get down towards the shoreline, the site sort of flattens out, and you can see the boundaries of the 100-year floodplain, which is shown in this darker blue area. It kind of covers approximately a third of the installation, and then there's the 500-year floodplain in this lighter blue. Here's just another look over an aerial photo showing the relationship of the installation to the topography that exists on the site, as well as the 100-year floodplain shown here in blue. It's a very old facility, and understandably so. It's a very historic facility. The entire installation is covered by 3 separate historic districts, with the oldest historic district and oldest building stock located in the Central Yard area, with the Eastern Historic District as well as the Western Historic District, which were later additions. Many of the existing buildings on the site are either contributing structures to the Historic District or individually listed in the National Register of Historic Places or eligible for listing. In terms of building age, the highest percentage of buildings at the base range between 81 and 115 years old, with the oldest buildings being located again in the central portion of the base, with an average age range of 93 years. And with regard to heights, Building height across the base is fairly uniform and modest, with approximately 75% of the buildings either at or below 50 feet. The shortest buildings, again, are in the center portion of the installation, which are mainly 1 to 3 story offices, community uses, as well as residential structures, which some of them are located along M Street, including building number 2, which is the visiting flag quarters, which is known as the Latrobe Gate. You may be familiar at the terminus of 8th Street. The tallest buildings are located out at the eastern and western perimeter of the site, largely being office buildings of about 4 to 6 stories high. Before getting into some of the specific recommendations or proposals of the master plan, just to quickly go over some additional emerging conditions. Currently, the employee population at the Navy Yard is about 18,000 employees, and it's growing, and it's expected to grow in the long term due to consolidation and mission growth. Over the next 5 years, or the short-term time frame of the Navy Yard, employee population is expected to grow by about 530 employees. Again, it has approximately 4,700 employee parking spaces. Naval District Washington is experiencing deficiencies in available conference and training facilities, and that the existing short-term lodging that exists throughout the region, including the Navy Yard, currently does not meet the regional demand. And then finally, public access to the existing National Museum of the U.S. Navy is limited due to security issues caused by its central location in the yard, as well as some recent events that have taken place at the Navy Yard. And so getting into the 5-year short-term component of the master plan, just overall, it's composed of a very modest or limited set of projects, 8 of them in fact, which can be categorized in terms of demolition as well as rehabilitation. There's no new construction contemplated over the next 5 years at the Navy Yard. In terms of the 2 demolition projects, those take place at piers 3 and 4. These 2 piers are in substandard condition. There's also no longer a mission requirement to maintain those 2 piers. And so over the next 5 years, the Navy has received funding to demolish those 2. The other 2 piers, piers 1 and 2, one of them which provides public access to the USS Barry, those are also in substandard condition, but they're proposed for rehabilitation in order to improve safety and access to the USS Barry, as well as there's continuing a mission requirement to have a functional dock at the Navy Yard. Other projects which are categorized as rehabilitation or improvement include some pedestrian and vehicular improvements at the O Street Gate, which is the main visitors gate at the installation, down at O and 11th Street. There is the rehabilitation of Building 111. This is probably the largest project in the short-term component, consisting of the renovation of approximately 126,000 square feet of office space for purposes of consolidating 6 facilities, 5 of them that exist on the installation, 1 of them that's at JBAD, in order to accommodate personnel for the Commander Navy Installations Command. And they're doing that in order to eliminate functional inefficiencies with those 6 facilities spread out across those 2 installations. There's also some improvements planned for a collection of buildings that are currently used to support the Museum of the U.S. Navy. These buildings will be renovated in order to provide modern office space, storage space, temperature-controlled storage space for the exhibits associated with the Navy Museum. In terms of staff's recommendation on the 5-year component, we already noted that there's a modest set of projects that make up this component that will renovate approximately 273,000 square feet of space, make improvements to the visitors gate, as well as address substandard conditions of the existing piers. We note that there'll be a small increase in the employee population by about 530 employees, which translates into a slight improvement of the installation parking ratio. Currently, the ratio is 1 space for every 3.77 employees. With that small increase in the number of employees of 530 employees with a cap on the existing supply of existing parking spaces, the parking ratio will improve to 1 space for every 3.88 employees. Finally, with regard to our recommendation on this component, in light of the short-term improvements that are being made to the buildings that currently house support functions and exhibit space and storage space for the U.S. Navy Museum, also in light of the public access limitations to this important cultural use, and the deficiencies that are noted in the master plan with regard to administrative space and conference space, Staff is recommending that the commission ask for information known to date from the Navy on its long-term plans for improving access in terms of location of the U.S. Navy Museum, whether or not they're contemplating an off-site location, another more secure location on the installation. Moving into the long-term 20-year framework plan for the draft master plan, staff will note that there are several very good strategies contained inside the long-term framework plan that support or are consistent with several policies inside the comprehensive plan related to the maintenance or the improvement of the quality of the workplace environment, preservation and expansion of existing open spaces, rehabilitation and preservation of existing historic resources, a lot of good strategies, some of which I'll highlight as I take you through some of the components of the framework plan. One of the overlays or strategies plans of the long-range component is this idea of maintaining and expanding upon some existing activity hubs that exist on the western side of the installation here. Building 22 currently serves as kind of the town center. It has a lot of retail amenities available to employees. And then the expansion of the range of amenities located down in the southeast portion of the installation. So we really very much support the growing of the amenity set down in the southeast portion of the base. We think that that area of the base has a lot of potential. There's a development parcels overlay to the long-range framework plan, which looks conceptually at what areas of the base are developed and which ones could be made available for infill or adaptive reuse, and then taking a slightly finer grain look at what particular parcels could be accommodate additional growth. You can see here a long-term strategy for the possibility of looking at some existing surface parking lots for additional growth, as well as the adaptive reuse of some of the cultural buildings in the center portion of the site to accommodate future, perhaps administrative office space needs. There's a multimodal circulation plan which contains strategies for supporting alternative modes of transportation in terms of commuting back and forth from the installation as a way to reduce the number of single occupancy vehicles that are coming to the installation. Some of the strategies that they are proposing is an expansion of the existing shuttle service on the Washington Navy Yard, and possibly in the long term providing direct service back and forth between the Navy Yard and nearby metro rail stations. Working with the city government to expand upon and add additional capital bike share facilities adjacent to the perimeter of the base, as well as the continuance or the expansion of bicycle facilities such as covered storage inside parking garages and providing showers and lockers inside office buildings. Vehicular circulation, in terms of there's not much you can do in terms of making changes to the existing network of streets. However, what's being proposed is a preservation of the two main loops that provide service into the base. The west loop, which is accessed by the Isaac Hall Gate, which is the main entrance to the facility, and providing that loop on the western side of the installation with connections to the parking garage there. And then the eastern loop providing access to the installation along 9th Street, at the N Street employee gate and the main visitors gate along O Street, and providing access to the administrative center or the dense administrative office space that's located there. One of the strategies that is proposed in this particular component of the master plan that staff strongly supports is looking at the reuse of the Tingy Gate, which is currently closed to both pedestrian and vehicular, repurposing that gate for pedestrian circulation in order to facilitate access to a lot of the amenities that are being brought online as part of the Yards development. The open space and pedestrian circulation plan looks at enabling existing open spaces and preserving them, using them to serve as an environmental function for stormwater management, particularly along the waterfront here. Continuing public access to the Anacostia Riverwalk, preserving and enhancing open spaces and pedestrian routes throughout the installation, and finally, improving circulation, pedestrian circulation, through a consistent treatment of streetscape enhancements. There are some strategies proposed for energy, sustainable energy production, as well as stormwater management. The energy strategies look to potentially incorporate green roofs on some buildings in the northeast section of the installation as a way to cut down on the energy consumption for those buildings. and then to expand upon some demonstration projects that are currently in place on the rooftops of the parking garages, mainly at Building 386, where there's a PV array and a couple wind turbines that provide energy to the main visitor center, which is located at the O Street gate here. For stormwater management, again, they're looking to use existing open spaces to serve an environmental function for stormwater management. They've also identified the potential for existing surface parking lots on the south side of the base for stormwater retention systems and other LID measures. There's a 20-year long-range land use component, which compared to the existing land uses, there aren't too many changes. I will note 3 of them, however. There are 3 strategies to study the potential for expanding base support at the Isaac Hall Gate in order to provide additional visitor amenities there to make it easier for visitors to the gate, visitors to the installation to reach their destination through the Isaac Hall Gate closer to the nearby Metro Rail down M Street, as opposed to making all visitors make their way over to the east side of the installation through the O Street Gate. There's a strategy for studying the potential expansion of administrative and community functions if the collection of buildings that are currently slated for some short-term improvements, those are the cultural buildings that are in the center location of the base, if they're deemed suitable for transition from their current use into administrative and community functions. Finally, there's a strategy to potentially relocate surface parking into new garages or existing garages. The master plan notes that this would not change the amount of parking on the base. However, it would free up the surface parking lots located along the southern part of the base for potential use as open space, recreation, administrative, or community uses. And this is just showing a diagram of those framework plan overlays kind of compiled into the one assembled framework plan. There is a transportation management plan with the master plan, which includes some information on a region-wide transportation survey that was conducted across several naval installations. What you're seeing here is a zip code map of the survey respondents from the Navy Yard. The survey had about 10,000 responses, and of those 10,000, approximately 3,300 of them were workers at the Navy Yard. And this is a zip code distribution of where those 3,300 employees reside throughout the extended region. You can see here that in terms of distribution of that employee population, it ranges from just north of Richmond all the way up into southern Pennsylvania, clustered kind of just outside the Beltway south of Washington, D.C., and then down along I-95. In terms of transportation mode choice, of the 3,300 respondents, which signifies about 18% of the current population at the Navy Yard. But of those 3,300 respondents, approximately 45% commute to the Navy Yard by single occupancy vehicle. 17% ride Metro Rail, and then the remaining percentage is spread across other modes of transportation such as commuter bus, circulator and Metro bus, shuttle bus, and carpool vanpool. There was a high correlation observed between mode choice for commuting and the distance that employees lived to the Navy Yard, and that's fairly common. For those respondents that live 3 miles and less, those are the people who are choosing to walk and bike. Between 3 and 10 miles, those are the employees choosing to use transit. Between 10 and 30 miles, those are the employees that primarily choose to commute by single occupancy vehicle. And then outside 30 miles, you'll see a transition to a preference for carpool vanpool. In terms of what that looks like geographically, you see here with the district in the middle with the Navy Yard in this location, that center area is the 3-mile distance of the people who are using transit, walking and biking. The blue area denotes that area where the employees are riding transit. The red area, single occupancy vehicle, and beyond that are the people who are carpooling and vanpooling. Also, as part of the master plan, the applicant is requesting a modified parking ratio for the Washington Navy Yard as what is currently prescribed in the comprehensive plan. Here in this diagram, you can see the outline of the Navy Yard, and in the red hatch area is what's the current boundary of DC's central employment area. According to the comprehensive plan, federal facilities that are located inside the central employment area are assigned a parking ratio of 1 space for every 5 employees. I will note, though, that the comprehensive plan does allow for flexibility in the enforcement of the parking ratio based on certain circumstances of a federal facility. The Navy is requesting a modified parking ratio of 1 space for every 4 employees based on a series of factors that relate to the distance of the installation to Metro Rail, noting that it's a bit more characteristic. It's a bit more characteristic of a federal facility that's located outside the central employment area, but still within the historic boundary of the District of Columbia, which carries with it a 1 space for every 4 employees. Noting that the adjacent area is not widely characterized as what's typical of a central business district. They provide some information about saying that the sidewalks and the traffic volume conditions along M Street create challenges to pedestrian circulation to the Navy Yard, and in particular the narrow sidewalk condition that exists along the, in close proximity to the Navy Yard along the historic Navy Yard wall. And then finally, the existing employee distribution would require a high percentage of 3 and potentially 4 seat commutes in order to meet the current comprehensive plan parking ratio. They're also proposing an alternative method to calculating the employee parking ratio. Alternative 1 is the method that's typically used. It's basically calculating the ratio of total employee population and total parking supply and running that ratio. The alternative that they're proposing is the second alternative, which instead of kind of creating or calculating it based on the entire supply of parking, both SOV parking, carpool, vanpool parking, handicap parking, it looks at it in terms of an SOV only mode split format. So instead of creating a calculation, what they're proposing is to factor out the carpool, vanpool spaces and only looking at a survey to see a 1-to-4 ratio would be a 25% SOV, and if they could hit that mode split of 25% of their population commuting by SOV, they would meet the ratio. The basis for this alternative is the Navy states that lumping in the carpool and vanpool commuters essentially creates a disincentive for those because they're being treated sort of the same as those who are choosing to commute less sustainably using single occupancy vehicles. And by eliminating the carpool and vanpool spaces from the equation, it would allow the Navy to better manage and encourage employees to choose an alternative mode of transportation such as carpooling and vanpooling. Finally, moving into our analysis of the master plan. This is a slide that Mr. Weil showed you previously in terms of why the Commission requires a master plan for installations that have more than one principal building or activity. We request a master plan under our authority under the National Capital Planning Act and consider master plans as a preliminary stage of planning prior to the preparation of individual projects in order to give the Commission a holistic view of the entire installation development program and to gain the context to fully understand and analyze future site-specific projects for consistency with the comprehensive plan. As I've already noted, the framework plan, the 20-year long-range plan, has several very good strategies included in it, as I previously highlighted. Although, as an overall tool for the Commission to use to gain a solid understanding of what to expect for the Navy Yard long-term, we do see some opportunities to make some improvements between the draft master plan and the final. More specifically, we see opportunities to improve how the long-term framework plan can address certain programmatic deficiencies within a highly constrained site, as you can see both in terms of its development pattern and the extent of the installation that's consumed by the floodplain. Improvements in the way the shoreline is treated with regard to stormwater management, impervious surface, parks and open space, and even security. And then finally, in achieving certain federal mandates and emerging issues related to greenhouse gas reductions and climate change. And so as this is a draft, staff is requesting that the Navy work with NCPC staff to modify the framework plan and its associated strategies to provide greater certainty in regard to how the master plan will guide future planning, programming, and budgeting decisions of the Navy, and in order to give the Commission that sufficient context that it needs in order to properly review specific projects. And in terms of some of the specific changes that could be made to the master plan to address some of the issues I just noted, one of them is the commitment to establishing a 100-foot buffer along the shoreline so that in the long term, when For example, the parking lots along the south of the installation need to be resurfaced, and the Navy is submitting funding for these projects, that any kind of impervious surface within that 100-foot buffer, they would commit to removing and incorporating either parks and open space, sustainable stormwater management, in order to help eliminate impervious surfaces along the waterfront, help the district's efforts to clean up the Anacostia River, and whatnot. We also see opportunity for two specific improvements to the framework plan in terms of identifying a particular area for future development in order to address some of its deficiencies in office space or conference space or housing. Noting that the site is very constrained and any kind of future development should be kept outside the 100-year floodplain. We see opportunities in two areas. One is the designation of a small portion of the undeveloped space in the north area of the installation, just west of the historic parade ground, in order to address future needs for new development for administrative purposes or housing. We see this as in a couple ways. One is that it's outside the floodplain and would also provide a fourth edge and start to create a quad condition with the future or the existing town center here and the historic parade ground in that location. We understand that there might be some topography issues there to development, some unstable soils, maybe some cultural constraints there, but we think it's a good idea for the Navy to look at between draft and final. And finally, the surface parking lot located south of Building 166, we think could present some opportunity for development in terms of either a future cultural use or administrative use. So we're looking at potentially designating a portion of that parking lot as a building site outside of the floodplain, outside of that 100-foot buffer. And lastly, we wanted to make a few points about the proposed modified 1-to-4 parking ratio. While staff is unable at this time to support the requested 1-to-4 based on certain location and operational characteristics of the Navy Yard, we are open to a slightly modified ratio, perhaps slightly below the assigned 1-to-5, if the Navy was able to make certain changes that I just described to the long-term framework plan that would help address some of the things that I just discussed. In terms of the proposed SOV mode split, alternative to achieving the parking ratio, we think that would be very difficult to reliably track and enforce. We also think that it doesn't do anything to help control the supply of parking at the installation. The comprehensive plan is very specific in stating that an available parking space at the work site is perhaps the most important factor in an employee choosing what mode of transportation they choose to use. The current way of calculating the parking ratio does more than just establish a parking maximum on an installation. It also helps to reduce the amount of land area that's used or improved with impervious surface just for purposes of parking. We also don't think that the current way of calculating the parking ratio creates a disincentive to those that are choosing to carpool and vanpool. In fact, the TMP does a pretty good job of documenting, based on the 3,300 survey respondents, what are the disincentives to carpooling and vanpooling. Of the 3,300 respondents, 1,500 of them use SOV, and those 1,500 indicated that inconsistent working hours, they prefer to commute alone, outside obligations such as childcare interfere with their ability to use carpool, vanpool, and some concern for getting home in an emergency. Just to talk through a couple points about some of the factors that are unique to the Navy Yard that could potentially justify a slightly modified parking ratio at the final master plan phase. The Navy Yard does have some unique physical and programmatic constraints in that it's very densely developed and has to pack a lot of program into a very limited amount of space limited in terms of available development sites, limited in terms of its need to have to adaptively reuse historic structures, and limited in the amount of land area that's consumed by the floodplain. At the same time, the Navy Yard, as I noted, is expected to grow in the long term, and that this future growth is going to have to accommodate some degree of parking. Finally, the current regional distribution shows that a very high level of 3 and 4 seat commutes would be required in order to meet the 1-to-5 parking ratio. And while we understand that commuting patterns and employee distribution can change over time. Currently, we have a picture before us of what it exists. And then as that changes over time, the commission has the ability to reassess what the parking ratio should be for the Washington Navy Yard. And finally, if we look at purely in terms of the distance of the installation to Metro Rail, we can draw some comparisons between the Navy Yard and some of the other installations that are nearby, such as Fort McNair and St. Elizabeth's Hospital. The comprehensive plan defines a reasonable walking distance as 2,000 feet, which is shown as this blue area here. 2,000 feet falls somewhere between a quarter mile and a half mile, and you can see the buffers in relation to the nearest Metro Rail stations to those installations. You can see that Fort McNair has slightly better walkability in terms of its proximity to the Metro Rail than the Navy Yard does, with that 2,000-foot buffer just touching the Isaac Hall gate. With employees who choose to use the Navy Yard Metro Rail station, potentially could have an additional half-mile walk across the installation to reach their work site. For facilities located in the central employment area, again, this is the red area, the comprehensive plan describes this area as an area that's characterized by a high concentration of transit services, a walkable and lively street network, and a relative abundance of commercial parking. Federal facilities within this area are typically within a quarter mile, which is shown here in these red buffers, from a Metro Rail station, and that there are other numerous Metrobus routes, commuter rails, and private shuttles. For the 1-to-4 parking ratio, the comprehensive plan describes this area within the historic district boundary as an area that's well served by transit, but federal facilities tend to be between a quarter mile and a half mile of a Metro Rail station, and that the surrounding street network is walkable. And so we can see here that there is some credence to some of the information that's in the master plan about how the position of the Navy Yard kind of maybe falls in between federal installations that are in the CEA and those that are within the historic district boundary. And so again, the comprehensive plan does contemplate and allow for flexibility in the parking ratio, and we see some support here to potentially consider something like that at the final master plan stage. And so, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I essentially gave you staff's recommendation as I was presenting the project, and so in lieu of reading through the recommendation, I can incorporate by reference what's in the EDR and can conclude my presentation at this time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Detman, very much. Before we go to Q&A, is there staff representative?
Sir, I thought I'd beat you to the punch because I know that Colonel Bukovic was graciously able to jump up here and do great stuff. But, sir, on behalf of my commanding officer, Captain Monty Ulmer, I'd like to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to meet with us today. Commander Rich Ficarelli, Public Works Officer, this is one of 6 of my bases. But first, let me just introduce my group, my team here, because they're the ones, the staff behind the guy with the pretty uniform here. Tim Montgomery, you can raise your hand. Phenomenal effort. Catherine Childs, Matt Schwartz, of course you met the Colonel. Rebecca Carroll, make sure I get these names right. Roselle, Solana, Rick Owens, and last but not least, Carl, I just met you today. All right, excellent. Okay, again, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking the time out to meet with us. I really do appreciate it. Let me highlight a few things that Mr. Detman, let me thank you as well and your staff for all the great efforts. Like the Colonel said, we can't do this course without you, and it's been a collaborative effort, and I do appreciate all the time and effort that you take with us. A few things I want to highlight. Three key points. We talked about the parking ratio. Yes, I think we can do better than the 1-to-4. However, I will say that along the Riverwalk, I think we need to look at that a little bit better. I know that you talked about that 100-foot setback. And we absolutely have to do better there. I think currently we talk to it in general terms. We have a bigger issue there, and that is, we are in a flood zone there. It says 100-year flood zone, I guess, but it's more like every 5 years or so. Matter of fact, just the recent winter, we had water come up to and just about over our piers there. So pretty scary stuff. So we put sandbags out there to kind of help mitigate any potential damage to our facilities. But having said that, I think we need to do a better job in that area. with that, if we do address that area, I think appropriately to help kind of mitigate some of that potential damage to our facilities, our base, I think it will reduce some of the parking spots as well. So I think we're going to kind of kill two birds with one stone. What it also do, we talked about our stormwater management plan. Yes, we have two, fairly large surface parking areas there. We have to do better in those areas. So yes, we do need to look at that a little bit closer. We talked a little bit about the National Museum. We have a few studies out right now that we just completed. My base commanding officer, Captain Monty Ulmer, he reviewed them again yesterday, really liked a couple of the options we have on the table. And one of those does do some reconfiguration there, provides kind of a better walk from the Riverwalks area in through Building 70 and then into Building 76. On that note, for the National Museum, we are looking at some off-site options, working with GSA. Matter of fact, we have a big brief that we're going in with our admirals next week to kind of talk about some of those options, some of our proposed COAs or courses of action. So we'll see how that goes. But there are a lot of things in the work now with both that particular area off the Riverwalk and then trying to increase or improve visitation to our museums. So we think the best solution long-term is to get off the yard because of the ATFP concerns that we have. We just went through a horrific event of 9/16 last September, just a few months after I arrived. Wasn't something that, of course, I never wanted to have to deal with here, having served in Iraq and other places. But we did. We bounced back, and because of that, yes, security is a concern of ours, but we do understand we also have a mission, and one of those missions is to have a museum. We have a museum in our area. It's a very historical site, and we want to retain that. And then last but not least, again, I can't say enough about what our plan is trying to achieve in terms of sustainability, energy efficiency, low-impact development, impervious surfaces. I know that my environmental team's coming up to me just about every day, an energy team, to come up with ideas and strategies. We do have a short and long-term strategy to hopefully become a better steward of our environment. We understand that over the next 5 to 20 years, we have to be good stewards of the world that we live in, and we're going to make every effort to do that. And with that, I'll open it up to your questions, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Questions or comments from the commission? Mr. May?
Can I call Colonel Bakotic up to answer my questions? Just kidding.
Have more questions for her? No. I know that the removal of the piers, I just want to point out that the riverbed of the Anacostia is the jurisdiction of the National Park Service. So if you're going to touch it in a substantial way, and I don't know if removing piers it falls into that category or not, but if you're going to put anything down on the riverbed, even in the process of doing it, you probably should coordinate with us. It's possible you might need permits from us, but you can contact my office, and the staff here can help you help you do that.
We sure will.
Because we issue permits for anything that touches the bottom of the river. What is, and this is maybe a question more for staff, but what does the future hold for M Street? Because it is really not a pleasant walking street. And maybe Ms. McCarthy wants to address that. I'm curious about future of the, whether there's any thought of reducing the travel lanes or whether the streetcar will be incorporated or whether there'll be street parking or any of those things that we look to kind of make it less of a, giant speedway.
Our knowledge is that DDOT right now is conducting an M Street. We understand that DDOT is currently looking at M Street very closely and preparing an M Street master plan. I'm not sure if that's the title, but they're looking at the overall transportation picture along M Street. And I would say that as development takes place along M Street, continues to take place, there's surface parking lots on the north side of M Street. Those are slated for redevelopment, that the pedestrian environment along M Street will continue to improve. I know that the Navy and DDOT have coordinated recently with regard to the timing of pedestrian signals across M Street as a result of some incidents and some conflicts that take place with people trying to get off the yard onto M Street. So I would say that pedestrian circulation in M Street is getting better. It's being looked at, but in terms of specific changes to sidewalk widths, pedestrian signalization and all that, I don't know what the actual plans are.
Okay.
Sir, if I could just add to that, that is a big source of concern for, especially the Marines out of 8th and I. And the Commandant of the Marine Corps has expressed his concern. So anything that we can do to look at that would be greatly appreciated, because they do walk between, because they use our medical clinic there on the Navy Yard. So when they walk across that street, it's almost like the game Frogger, if you've seen that, trying to kind of get through. But I know that we have worked with DDOT. They've made some improvements. But I know with all the construction there, it makes it difficult. We understand that. I'm in construction too, that's what we do. But anything we can do to look at that would be greatly appreciated.
I would agree. The circumstance of the M Street sidewalk, I mean, even if there are more people and there's more life on the sidewalk, it isn't going to improve the width of the sidewalk, and I think that's one of the inherent problems. And I mean, the M Street is a lot like Florida Avenue, where there's so little sidewalk, and then there's nowhere to go from there. So if, and this has actually happened I can't remember how many years ago it was, but there was a terrible accident there, and several people were killed on M Street because of the vehicles going up on the sidewalk. It's a very bad circumstance. So anything that can be done to improve that, and I think it's largely going to be on DDOT to do that. I do have trouble understanding why we need that many travel lanes, because every time I've ever been on the road, now granted I don't drive on it in rush hour, but every time I've ever been on it, there are ample lanes. It's like Pennsylvania Avenue. I mean, it doesn't connect as much as it maybe used to. I don't know. It just seems like a lot of travel lanes. And the last question I have has to do with the potential growth of the campus. I understand the constraints. I mean, it's already fairly dense in terms of the footprint. It's not very dense in terms of the heights of buildings, and I know that there are limits because of the number of historic buildings. But I'm wondering about two other metrics that ought to be thought about as the master planning process continues or evolves. One is the square footage of space per person in these buildings, because we know that those numbers are going down as teleworking is going up and hoteling and frankly just even the amount of work, the space we get to work in is shrinking. I know that's happening in my building. And it's a big thing at GSA. So is that, where are they in terms of those numbers, and where are they headed? Do you know any of that?
The master plan doesn't have, what's the square footage per person right now and what's planned, but they do have a strategy. They make a commitment to, as tenants move out of space and that space is renovated, that they're moving to smaller footprints.
Mm-hmm.
So they're trying to.
But do we know how
people.
small? I mean, okay.
Sir, I could get those numbers. We actually have their criteria, really depending on what your function, what your rank is. I mean, it tells you, and it's not very much. We just renovated 111, Building 111, as I talked about, for Commander Naval Installations Command. And it was very sad. There were some 06 captains that were not real thrilled when they had to follow the guidelines that they had to follow based on all the rules and regulations that we have. So there are facility requirements that tells them how much space they get, how big their offices should be, and who gets an office and who doesn't. And that was a very emotional issue when a captain that had an office, very large one, got moved to a cubicle. So
right, I understand that. I appreciate that. We all, I think, face that on a certain level. But I think, and I'm actually not really that interested in, how much space does a captain get, how much space does, somebody else get. It's the question of, in aggregate, is it, are they pushing down toward the 150, 140 square feet per person, which seems to be where things are heading in the rest of the federal government. I think that's in aggregate, that's kind of the level of information that I would be seeking. And then the second thing is whether there actually is potential for more substantial redevelopment of the campus in the long run. I'm not suggesting that this is something that needs to be done, immediately, but, right now, if the tallest buildings seem to be 4 to 6 stories tall, which was what was in your presentation, not very tall, given that there are 130-foot buildings going up on M Street, down the street. So I'm not suggesting that that's appropriate here on, I would want to understand, or think we should understand in the long run, is whether there actually is potential for higher density development in this area, particularly if streetcar is built along M Street, and if there's further development to the east, all of these things that, we want to, I think, in the long run, encourage density in the right places, and this may be one of those places.
Sure.
Ms. McCarthy.
I wanted to say, on a very positive note, that from the District of Columbia's point of view, that there are so many great things that the Navy has done with the Navy Yard. The decision to locate NAVC there was a huge factor, excuse me, in the revitalization of the Anacostia waterfront. That really established a very important beachhead that led to the development of 3 commercial office buildings along M Street, and really helped get things going on the eastern side of M. And we had such positive experiences with the former Commander Admiral Weaver, whose decision it was to allow the bike path to go along the waterfront, in distinct contrast to the commander of Fort McNair, who is requiring the bike path to go along 2nd Street, where it passes along a truck inspection facility and a wall, so not exactly a great recreational resource. So the fact that you guys have been willing to do that, despite concerns and issues, has been really so positive. And you've done such a nice job with the adaptive reuse of the historic buildings. Really, some very, very attractive adaptive reuse. I would just say, in terms of the future development and security issues, we've had pushback from the Navy when trying to redevelop the north side of M Street, including when, Mr. May probably remembers, when we were implementing inclusionary zoning and wanted to include that area, but it would have required providing a slight, relatively small height bonus in order to accommodate affordable housing. And the Navy's objection was very vociferous by saying, well, they didn't want to see tall buildings along M Street because of high-value targets or whatever immediately on the other side of the wall. So to the extent that in your redevelopment you can move those to someplace else, the district has pinned an awful lot of our revitalization strategy on the development, the fairly intensive development of Southeast Waterfront, because that's where we can develop and incorporate new residents without displacing people and without destroying the low-density residential character of our neighborhood. So,
Ma'am, which areas in particular are those?
Well,
You said north of the yard, right across.
The Blue
from-
Castle, around Barrack,
okay.
the lower part of Barracks Row, one of the office buildings that was proposed for the, as part of the Capra-Carrollsburg redevelopment. So north, just to the west of 8th Street. And then I know there was some concern expressed on the part of the Navy about whatever Forest City would choose to do with the development of the building on the northeast corner of the yards. And we would like to see all of those developed as intensively as possible to just keep vitality and keep things going in that area. And I'm thinking, I'm looking at your employee commuting pattern, but thinking also, if your workforce is like the overall federal workforce, 30% are baby boomers and going to be retiring in the next 10 years. So, and to the extent that that older workforce is replaced with a younger workforce that is far more interested in city living, I would just commend to you guys to think about a live near where you work incentive, because God knows there's a lot of redevelopment possibilities and land around there that would be happy to accommodate new employees at the Navy Yard. And lastly, I was very glad to see the concern raised in the staff report about the Navy Museum. It's just such a great museum. It's one of the only museums you can take your young sons to where they are not bored out of their mind. The fact that you can sit on a turret gun and turn it around and raise the periscope up was so great, and so it was so unfortunate to have the access restricted. So whatever could happen to either publicize it more, because I know you can still get to it, it just requires a process. And if we can help market that through the district or through the business improvement district, we would be happy to do that. But if you decide to relocate, we got that Southwest Waterfront redevelopment and a lot of redevelopment area that'll be taking place in Buzzards Point and that whole area around there. So, come to see us if you would like
Yes,
to
ma'am, we
stay in
will.
the neighborhood, but don't want to stay there in the Navy Yard.
We really do, and yes, ma'am, we will take you up on that.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Dennis.
Yes, this is really to follow up on the point made about the museum. This is a year of many historic anniversaries. Two have already been alluded to, the 70th anniversary of D-Day tomorrow, although I guess today is the 70th anniversary of when Eisenhower postponed D-Day by one day. Then there's the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Fort Stevens that we're participating in having a program on next month. And then there's the centenary, the 100th anniversary of the outbreak of World War I, June 28th through the first week of August. And then there's the 200th anniversary of the burning of Washington, which I believe started at the Navy Yard. I think my understanding is historically that the Brits couldn't get to Baltimore, so after the Battle of Bladensburg, they marched on Washington, and our guys blew up the ships or whatever, set off the explosives or whatever. And then the British went on, of course, to burn the Capitol and the White House and the newspaper office and some other places. But I guess I'm wondering, is there anything in the museum or any commemoration of that anniversary, the 200th anniversary of basically the beginning of the burning of Washington?
Sir, I'm not sure off the top of my head. I will go back and
Okay.
find out and send something out.
Okay.
I should probably know that, but we have quite a few events, but I'll look into it and
Okay,
see.
thanks.
Mr. Hart.
In JBAB, we were concerned about flooding where there's a levee. Now, the Navy Yard doesn't have a levee, and a lot of the buildings are sitting in the 100-year floodplain.
Sure.
What kind of mitigation measures are planned or in place to protect those buildings?
Well, sir, that's what I alluded to just briefly. We show that, you kind of showed that 100-foot setback. We have to do better at addressing that, and that's what I talked about. I think we could do a few things by doing so. One, I want to reduce the risk to our base. The other is reducing parking, and then also the stormwater management plan. So our planners, we'll look a little bit harder at that because I think we need to address that. It's just a scare every year. Like I said, I had sandbags out, my guys out putting sandbags at doorsteps to keep water out. So we have to do better there. We will look at that and make sure that we address the concerns that they've been there a while, but now it seems like it's happening more frequently. That water's getting up there and it's going into our facilities. We need to stop that, figure out what we can do.
Is there anything in the master plan that addresses this 100-year floodplain mitigation?
I don't believe we went into too great of detail with that. Is that correct, Matt? Yeah, we didn't do a lot of detail. We'll address that because I think we need to. We've been talking about that, but we need to provide a little more granularity to what we can do to.
Calculate how much damage you get with a 100-year flood. Look at all the buildings that are sitting in the floodplain, and you're going to have an enormous cost if those buildings flood, and sandbags aren't going to do it.
Yes, sir.
And a 100-year floodplain is the minimum of risk. I mean, you've got 500-year, 1,000-year floods. When I was down in New Orleans after Katrina, the Dutch came in and asked the Corps of Engineers, what storm were you trying to protect against? And the Corps of Engineers very proudly said 100-year flood. And the Dutch were just baffled. And so the other question coming back the other way was, in Holland, what storm do you try to prevent? And they said the 10,000-year flood. And we're working on the 100,000-year flood now. So they take it seriously because it's a national issue. I think 100-year flood is not adequate, given the fact that conditions are changing as we can clearly see.
Sir, quick, if I could say one more thing on that. Coincidentally, we just had a data call about 2 weeks ago on assessing all of our bases that are on waterfronts. And they came from the Pentagon. We submitted our information up on, and they wanted to know who's vulnerable, and we are, of course, and so is JBAB. So we just submitted that up. I know that the military is looking at it, the Navy especially is looking at that very closely. So rather than go back, we'll kind of see which way we're going as far as the Navy's concerned, but we'll also just locally at the installation level do more to help
You're
them.
probably more vulnerable since you have to be near the water anyway.
So-
Now, there was some discussion about stormwater management. Is there any stormwater management devices in the facility now?
Yes, sir.
And
We do.
what kind of improvements are you looking for quantity and quality?
Well, we currently have, we put in a bunch of pervious surfaces along the water's edge there at the, and I know probably Matt Schwartz could probably help me out with this, a little more detail on exactly what that looked like, because they did that before I got here. But we also have these bucket barrels, and we're looking at these rain gardens where we're putting these planters in place that will help kind of catch some of that runoff along our especially along parking lots, for example, and in and around our parking garages. We've done that, and anywhere where we have large amounts of water runoff, they're called these rain gardens, and it's pretty cool. I mean, I've seen them on a few. Bethesda has them, so we're doing that right now as we speak.
Are your stormwater catch basins tied into the joint sewer system?
Sir.
It is?
Yes, sir. Mhm.
Is there any thought to separating that out?
We haven't looked at that very closely, sir. No.
Because right now you dump all your stormwater into the sanitary system rather than managing it. I mean, it's citywide, but you have a piece of it that you can control.
Well, it's coming in off the city, so we catch whatever's coming in from the city as well. So we have to.
No, I'm talking about your
Our
drains. Your drains are going down into a sewer someplace. Is it a separate storm sewer or or into the joint sewer? And I assume it's into the combined sewer system. And I think that as a master plan, you might want to try as a part of your stewardship for the environment to look at separating your stormwater from the sanitary systems. And third, Executive Order 13.514 talks about greenhouse gases and energy conservation. There are targets in there for meeting certain reductions in energy use and greenhouse gas emissions. Are those in the master plan specifically addressed to meet those criteria?
Yes, sir. I believe so. I don't know how much detail we do have. We do talk about it. We have a whole section on it. Matt, any more to add to that? I mean,
I saw it
we
referenced
do address it in there.
I saw it referenced in
but-
the transportation section, but not in the greenhouse gas environmental section, where you'd be reducing your, electrical or power generation requirements by 30% or going to,
Well, we do
self-sufficiency.
that mandate, that 30% reduction by 2015, which we're about at 25% right now.
It's a near impossible target, and I would be very curious to know how a facility like yours is trying to address that quantitatively with specific projects.
Well, we're doing LED lighting is one big one. That's reduced our consumption quite a bit. Top of my head, we don't have any alternative energy solutions there, but we are looking at a plant out there at NRL, which is another one of my bases. But really, lighting was probably the biggest one as far as power goes. But low flow urinals, we're doing these motion sensor lighting to make sure that when folks are out of their spaces, that the lighting will automatically go off, which has helped quite a bit. Really, LED lighting was the low-hanging fruit. That was a quick bang for the buck, good return on investment. So we're doing more of that. So every year, over the next few years, I have quite a few energy projects, looking at our HVAC systems, making them more efficient. We're doing retrocommissioning, replacing our roofs, the different types of roof. We're putting these white EPDM roofs on there that of course reflect the sunlight. They're more energy efficient. So we're doing quite a few things, very specific things, to reduce our energy consumption.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Following up on Mr. Hart's questions about stormwater, and I meant to ask this of JBAB as well, but stormwater management plan is tied to specific phosphorus, nitrogen, sediment reduction goals, and are those tied into the Bay TMDL or the DC's TMDL, or do they have their own? And part B is the stormwater management projects identified, especially in JBAB, they had quite a number. Are those designed to meet compliance or? Which does not suggest they're not in compliance, I don't know that.
Yeah,
but-
well, so on that second question, slightly in contrast to the JBAM master plan, the Navy Yard does reference the mandates, ESA 438, 13514, Chesapeake Bay TMDL, I don't think is referenced, but.
There is an executive order on that, too.
Right. So it lays out a series of broad strategies related to energy, sustainable energy production and stormwater management, but doesn't take the next step in terms of identifying specific projects. And so JBAB does do that to a certain extent. In terms of quantifying, Commissioner Hart noted the greenhouse gas reduction requirement under 13514. Instead of saying 13514 requires X percent of greenhouse gas reduction, instead of applying that to each facility, I believe the Navy is sort of addressing that overall reduction region-wide. And so they're reporting that greenhouse gas reduction region-wide as opposed to at the installation level. I know that with the Chesapeake Bay TMDL, I believe that their approach to that is the same thing. They're not saying our current TMDLs for Navy Yard is this, and in 5 years it's going to be this amount of phosphorus, nitrogen, and solids. So again, it sort of works at a slightly broader level, and that's sort of one of our recommendations with regard to the long-term framework plan. We would like to see a little bit more specificity in terms of how we're going to treat the shoreline and the amount of impervious surface, in order to improve stormwater management and whatnot.
Thank you. Mr. Provencio, then Mr. Miller.
Appreciate the comprehensive presentation by Mr. Detman. Thank you for coming to represent the perspectives of Captain Oldmer. Similar comments on the positive side about the establishment of the 10 design principles that will shape the master planning, as well as the alignment between the master planning and the longer-term framework plan. I think that's commendable. Concur with the comments of several of the other commissioners about the museum. I think it's not only a Department of Defense asset, it's a national treasure. So consideration of moving it out of the vulnerable area. The vulnerability, according to our research, shows that I think it was 80% of JBAB would flood with a Category 4 hurricane, and it's 70% for the Navy Yard, so it's still substantial. So that reinforces the comments that folks have previously made about the investment in levees and protections as opposed to trying to repair flooded out buildings. One of the lessons learned too from Katrina, there was a reference to Katrina. General Honoré, that was the deputy to the commander, the commandant, Thad Allen, that ran that operation, was his advice to DOD planners and others was at least 500 year, as opposed to the standard 100-year floodplains. I think some of the Navy Yard special challenges are, and we've alluded to them, when you've got a small site with 76 acres, but 13 times smaller than JBAB, and you've got 40% more folks, just under 1 million square feet less space, the density ratios are very, very high for the Navy Yard. And then when you factor in the numbers of buildings that are historic preservation becomes very, very important, and kind of constrains and limits some of the options that you have. So while JBAB had relatively flat projected growth, there is then some growth at the Navy Yard, but it's very, very modest. It's only about 3% if you run the math. So I think there's a lot of very positive aspects of the planning. I think the case that the Navy Yard has presented for the staff to consider the parking ratios was very well thought out. You pointed out that the central employment area just brushes the Navy Yard, and the configuration as well as the access points into the Navy Yard seems to me to absolutely justify consideration of a very, very modest waiver to the parking ratio. So I'd encourage you to continue to work as staff to come to a consensus and a final decision on that. So thank you for the presentation.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have I'm sorry, Mr. Miller, that's right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would associate myself with many of the positive comments that have been made by my colleagues about the plan and everything that the Navy Yard has done in the past to open up the Riverwalk and that kind of thing. But let me just ask you the same question I asked about JBAB, about the number of them, of your 18,000 employees at the Navy Yard. What percentage of them currently live in the district versus elsewhere? Is it similar to the
Sir,
number? You don't have that
I'm not
number.
sure exactly, although I do know approximately 50% of our employees do take mass transit into the Navy Yard, and the other 50%, of course, drive in.
Right.
So I do know that. I know, although you look at that ring, it looked pretty bad. It was a small red ring and then a very large blue ring. However, it's about a 50-50 split on
Right.
those who commute
I
in.
would think it would be a little higher than the 15% that JBAB was reporting for district residents. But I would just second the comments of Commissioner McCarthy about if you, to the extent you can incorporate live near where your work incentives into your long-range planning. There is a lot of housing, new housing development for that's going to opening up of the yards and the whole Capitol Riverfront district that's available for existing employees and new employees, and very attractive mixed income housing. So I would encourage you to. I think there's an executive order of the president's that addresses live near where you work, as well as district policy. So I would encourage you.
I will add that approximately 40% of my junior officers, I have 20 of them, live in the Capitol Hill area, which is in Georgetown. But they ride bikes in, and so I'm not sure if that's indicative of the rest of my staff. But for my young officers, they love living downtown. I wish I could too, but I have a high school age son, and we live out in Springfield. So, anyway.
Well, thank you for your presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, just two quick things I had forgotten to add. One, I take your concerns about M Street and understand them, and we'll definitely go back. We have a coordination meeting coming up with DDOT, so we'll talk to them about that. We did recognize that after the first 3 office buildings were built to respond to NAVC, we looked at them and said, ugh, too bad we didn't have more controlling zoning in place. So in the new zoning that was passed, we require a 15-foot sidewalk be established as a minimum in front of those buildings, even if that means they have to pull back from the property line. But that only helps on the north side of M Street, and you've got the yards and all the wonderful amenities of that, so I'm sure it would be really nice to have your portion of M Street be a more pleasant walk. And with respect to your recommendation, Mr. Detman, that they establish a 100-foot buffer, certainly we have established in the zoning on the private side a minimum 75-foot no-build zone in order to facilitate the river walk and to create that kind of buffer. So 75 feet, 100 feet, whatever, it's, you will know that whatever you do on your side, there will be continuity and the ability to really take advantage of the strolling along the waterfront and all of the benefits that brings.
Thank you. Sensing no further questions or comments, the matter before us is the approval of the comments for the draft master plan, final to come before us later. Is there a motion on the EDR? It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of the EDR, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
The very last item on our agenda is item number 6C, site improvements and perimeter security for the People's Garden at Jamie L. Whitten Federal Building, and Ms. Hirsch is here.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. The Department of Agriculture has submitted the People's Garden site improvements and perimeter security project for your preliminary approval. The project is located at the USDA headquarters, which includes both the Jamie Whitten Building and the South Building. The Whitten Building is located directly on the National Mall, and the South Building is located to the south across Independence Avenue. The project area is bound by 14th Street on the west, 12th Street on the east, C Street to the south, and Jefferson Drive on the north, and Independence Avenue bisects this site. The Whitten Building is the only federal office building on the National Mall. It also houses a cabinet-level position and has therefore been rated as a level 4 facility. It was constructed in phases. The Beaux Arts building has a very strong cemetery that anchors the west end of the National Mall. Here you can see some existing conditions of the grounds at the Whitten Building, including the ceremonial court at the top center here, as well as the People's Garden and how the site is activated during the spring and summer months with a farmer's market. The South Building was also constructed in phases in the 1930s and reflects a minimalist classical style of architecture. It was the largest office building in the world when it was constructed in the 1930s. And these existing conditions photos include showing the bridges over Independence Avenue, along with the metro station at 12th and Independence, the bike share station, and then the existing streetscape condition along C Street. To review the property lines and jurisdiction on the site, as the Whitten Building faces the mall, its north yard or lawn is under the jurisdiction of the National Park Service. The property line for the Whitten Building extends to the curb. The South Building was essentially built out to the property line, but the adjacent sidewalks are public space and under the control of the District Department of Transportation. The U.S. General Services Administration owns both of the buildings, but has delegated authority to USDA, and so the diagram on the right indicates that USDA essentially maintains both blocks. This series of diagrams shows the evolution of the site from the late 19th century to the mid-20th century and just provides some context on the development of the proposed project. Essentially, in the late 19th century, the first agricultural buildings were constructed on the site. There were formal gardens, though, directly located to the north. By the early 20th century, the diagram over on the upper right indicates that the two wings of the Whitten Building were complete, and that also included, it also indicates that the 19th century landscape was still intact. It also shows, though, the two semicircular driveways were constructed, one to the east and one to the west. By the early 1930s, the central portion of the Whitten Building was complete. That included the ceremonial court as well as Jefferson Drive along the mall. Also during that time is when Frederick Law Olmsted began to be very active in working on landscape plans for the site. Olmsted had already been working on the mall given his involvement with the Macmillan Commission, and the agricultural grounds were some of the first to be planted according to the Macmillan Plan. By the 1936, you see the completion of the South Building, as well as the two bridges over Independence Avenue that connects the two buildings. And then finally, by the middle of the 20th century, you see the two semicircular driveways had disappeared. And to the east and west, you have the two parking lots. So in 2009, to celebrate President Lincoln's 200th birthday, the Secretary of Agriculture formed the first People's Garden on the grounds of the Whitten and South buildings. The purpose of the People's Garden is to essentially connect Americans with the country's farmers and demonstrate the importance of caring for the land with sustainable practices. So building upon the People's Garden project, the current project has been conceived of as an outdoor agricultural museum that's essentially been guided by four principles, and that includes integrating perimeter security into the landscape through the use of a cable rail system as well as some other security elements, promoting sustainability principles, enhancing the historic landscape and the Olmsted designs, and then finally educating visitors about the history of USDA and the role of agriculture. The project has several components, but some of the primary features include renovation of the ceremonial court here at the center, the addition of new east and west promenades along the north lawn, reconfiguration of the east parking lot here into a market commons, and then also along Independence, the conversion of the two parking lots into multipurpose event spaces. And then finally, on the west side of the Witten building, the introduction of an heirloom or pollinator garden. At the south building, the project has slightly more limited scope, but includes streetscape improvements along, Independence, and that is to strengthen the connection to the Witten building. It also includes the replacement of all of the guard booths that are currently along the C Street. And finally, also along C Street, USDA is proposing to install an agricultural timeline to promote the agency's history. So the project is proposed to be accomplished over 3 phases over the course of 15 years. Essentially, phase 1 includes all of the perimeter security at the Witten building, the modifications to the ceremonial court, as well as the west court, and it also includes the replacement of the guard booths along C Street. Phase 2 includes the improvements on the east side of the Witten building, the improvements to the market commons area, and then the associated upgrades to the C Street streetscape. And then finally, phase 3 includes the improvements to the 2 parking lots on the south side of the Witten building along Independence Avenue. I'll be discussing each of these in a little more detail, but wanted to note that for today, the Commission's being asked to provide preliminary approval for the whole project at the conceptual design phase. The individual projects will be refined and submitted at a later time for the Commission's final approval. So to start with the ceremonial court, the design is based off of historic documentation. This space retains a high degree of integrity in terms of its original layout and use. Essentially, the center, there's a wall at the center that will be restored, and then 2 new additional walls based on historic designs will be added and reinforced with a cable rail system for security purposes. In addition to bollards will be added to the stairways that are on either side of the center wall. Paving at the ceremonial court will be replaced with a permeable granite cobble paver, both to allow for water harvesting and improve stormwater management on the site. Directly adjacent to the ceremonial court, 2 fountains will be added. This is for rainwater harvesting. These fountains, though, will also be added as a perimeter security element. In addition, as I mentioned, the 2 promenades to the east and the west are proposed to be added to improve circulation throughout the site. These pathways are based on a design by Olmsted that was never implemented. In addition, as you can see in the renderings, benches are proposed to be added to provide both visitor amenity and also will function as perimeter security. So moving to the northeast corner of the site, the current People's Garden will be transformed into what will be known as the Lincoln Teaching Garden and Market Commons. The existing parking lot that is there will be eliminated. An arced pathway that is refers back to the historic curved driveway that was once on the site will be installed, along with some raised planting beds, a market canopy structure that you see in the bottom right here. This canopy will shelter the vendors from the farmer at the farmer's market from the sun, rain, but it also has been designed to accommodate other uses and activities when the market is not in use. So moving to the south, the east court of the Witten building, historically this court was used for parking, but over the long term, over the next 15 years, USDA is proposing to transform it into a multi-purpose event space that can be used for a variety of activities. They envision perhaps a food truck gatherings or cooking demonstrations taking place here. Changes that will be made: 2 curb cuts will be removed, permeable granite cobble pavers will be added, new planting beds will be installed, and again, the cable rail system will be added to provide perimeter security. On the west court, this court will be treated very similarly to the east court. It historically was also used for parking. It will be converted into another multi-purpose event space. USDA envisions perhaps using it to have some kind of agricultural displays in this area. I will point out the mechanical building that's located in this court already has a green roof. They're proposing to extend that green roof and install a green wall on the south and west sides of the building. Also to highlight in this area, adjacent to where the bridge is over Independence Avenue, so directly adjacent to the west court as well as the east court, this is the location where the perimeter security, due to the size of the building yard, will jump out to the edge of the sidewalk. Bollards will be used as well as benches for perimeter security in that location. So moving to the west side of the Witten building, USDA is proposing an heirloom and pollinator garden as well as a shade garden. This space is a prominent location in the monumental core along 14th Street, has views to the Washington Monument, and USDA is planning to showcase heirloom plants and the importance of agriculture. The idea is that this space would be slightly more passive space for visitors to enjoy, and rather than as a heavily programmed space like other areas on the site. Again, you see an arced pathway and the arrangement of planting beds that was inspired by the historic driveway that you see in the upper left. All the parking and curb cuts will be removed from this area, and the perimeter security is proposed to be located behind the shade garden and will also consist of primarily a cable rail system that's integrated into the landscape. So moving to the south building, the scope of work includes strengthening the street tree perimeter along Independence Avenue, adding bioswales along C Street, as well as an educational timeline. And then, as I've mentioned, replacing the guard booths that are located next to the entrances to the parking courts. So for Independence Avenue, the spatial character is well defined by the facades of the two buildings. Historic documentation indicates that street trees were once an important element of the streetscape. However, the street trees are currently in very poor health. So the goal with the current project is to reestablish a framework and physical conditions that will allow the street trees to mature and reestablish the framework that acknowledges the importance of Independence Avenue. Along C Street, as I mentioned, the existing guard booths will be replaced with guard booths that are more compatible in design with the architecture of the south building. The new booths will also meet security standards and allow the guards to be more comfortable as they perform their duties. So here you can see also the plan for the proposed agricultural timeline that's proposed for the C Street. This will be integrated into the new bioswales that are proposed and are aiming to essentially green up this part of the street. As you can see from the historic photograph, at one time there were planting beds and trees located along this block. So moving into staff's analysis, we found the project to be overall consistent with several elements of the comprehensive plan. We focused our analysis on the location of the perimeter security, as well as the proposed reduction in parking at the Witten building, the incorporation of sustainability features, and the rehabilitation of the historic landscape. Also just wanted to note USDA has completed an environmental assessment that concluded in the signing of a FONSI, or finding of no significant impact. USDA has also been actively leading a Section 106 consultation and is working to formalize and execute a memorandum of agreement to address the adverse effects. As far as the location of the perimeter security, as I've mentioned, it's primarily within the building yard, with the exception of the limited locations along Independence adjacent to the bridges that connect the Witten and the South building. In 2004, the Commission had, the diagram in the upper left, you see the Commission had approved a previous proposal that was never implemented, which primarily consisted of a system of bollards that ran around the edges of the site all the way out and included protecting the parking on the east and the west sides of the Witten building. The current proposal both pulls back that perimeter security line so that the west and east sides of the Witten building are able to provide a public benefit in the form of a garden on the west and the market space on the east, but also the design calls for the use of a cable rail system that will be integrated into the landscape. In addition, there are a variety of other elements, such as the fountains by the ceremonial court, as well as benches being used to reduce the visual impact of the perimeter security on the site and the surrounding streetscape. As far
So I've heard you describe, are there renderings of the perimeter security? Because a cable rail integrated into the landscape can mean a lot of things.
Right. I mean, I've shown most of the renderings we have. We don't have anything in a lot more detail. Again, this is for preliminary approval at this time. It'll be developed further as before it comes in for final approval.
Okay.
So regarding the parking, USDA's efforts are commendable in terms of eliminating the parking from the east and the west sides of the building. Staff would like to see that the parking that is proposed for the ceremonial court also eliminated. We feel that with this project, there's an opportunity to remove all of the parking from the site that faces, particularly the part of the site that faces the National Mall. Obviously, the court will continue to be used for ceremonial drop-offs and pickups, but the vehicles can be parked on other locations on the site. So therefore, staff is recommending that the commission request that USDA eliminate these 8 parking spaces. Regarding the planting plan, USDA is proposing to retain most of the, or many of the historic trees on the site, but they're also proposing to introduce species including fruit and nut-bearing trees, particularly along parts of 12th and 14th Streets. That planting design follows an approach to achieve a sustainable urban harvest. And while staff is supportive of that approach, we are recommending that the commission note that the treatment of the streetscape, including the selection of street trees and paving materials, both should establish a cohesive design palette, but also be consistent with local standards. Finally, regarding the west side of the Witten building, staff is aware that Congress has authorized the National Liberty Memorial Fund to establish a memorial in the district or its environs to honor the more than 5,000 slaves and free black persons who served as soldiers or provided civilian assistance during the American Revolution. Pursuant to the Commemorative Works Act, if the fund wishes to consider sites within Area 1, either the Secretary of the Interior or the Administrator of GSA must, after consulting with the National Capital Memorial Advisory Commission, make a determination that the memorial is of preeminent and lasting historic significance to the country. This past December, the fund did present to NCMAC, and NCMAC found that this memorial was of preeminent and lasting historic significance. During that meeting in December, the fund also identified the west side of the Witten building as their preferred site. So therefore, staff is recommending that the commission commend USDA for developing a flexible design for this portion of the site that could be modified to accommodate a memorial on the site. So with that, it is the executive director's recommendation that the commission approve the preliminary site and building plans for the People's Garden site improvements and perimeter security project at the USDA headquarters, to adopt the USDA finding of no significant impact for the environmental assessment on the project, to request that USDA eliminate all the parking from the ceremonial court along the National Mall, notes that the treatment of the streetscape, including the selection of street trees and paving materials, should both establish a cohesive design palette and be consistent with local standards. And finally, commends USDA for developing a design that is flexible that could accommodate a memorial on the west side of the Witten building. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Hirsch, very much. We do have one speaker in the public comment section. We have Mr. Maurice Barboza, representing the National Mall Liberty Fund, D.C. Welcome. We're glad you're here.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to be here. The last time I was here was in 1987, talking about a project to honor African Americans who served in the Revolutionary War. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, I just want to give you a little background on this. The National Capital Memorial Advisory Commission met the middle of last year in June, and we presented 42 sites. And our primary goal was to find one either with a view of or in close proximity to the Washington Monument for obvious reasons. And this site came up somewhat later in our process. We were looking at Freedom Plaza, the Independence, or rather the Virginia Avenue site at the interior building, this little triangle, and also Freedom Plaza. And then this site came into play in a tour. And it's an extraordinary site. It's a gateway site into downtown Washington. As you're crossing the Rochambeau Bridge and Independence Avenue, the first thing that you see is this site just to the left of the Whitten Building on the west side. And then when you turn to the left, after you cross Independence Avenue, you see the Washington Monument. And our memorial is about the struggle for liberty. It's about African Americans from the beginning of our country, and actually even before the beginning of our country, during as early as the French and Indian Wars, participating in the struggle that helped to hew a nation. And this is extraordinary history. It's history few of us really know about, and we believe that this site would tell that story through its interrelationship with the Washington Monument, the future African American History Museum, which would be on a diagonal across 14th Street from this site, and also the American History Museum. And of course, the entry into downtown Washington. Washington had been a home to at least 14 African American soldiers of the Revolutionary War, including one who lived near the Navy Yard, our previous discussion. The building presents an extraordinary challenge, and we're looking forward to working with GSA, the National Park Service, and of course USDA. We have had meetings with USDA since May of 2013, and of course received a great deal of assistance from GSA and also from the National Park Service in our presentations. And our goal is to ensure that we understand fully the building, the intent of the designers, the landscape designers, the building designers, and our team is composed of Frank Lotion Architects, Art Lotion, and Michael Frank, our classical architects in Washington, David Newton, who is a classical sculptor, and of course Michael Curtis, I should have introduced earlier, who is the chair of our Site and Design Committee. And I conclude by thanking you and thanking GSA and NPS and the Commission, and look forward to working with the USDA team, and welcome any questions that you might have.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Anyone have any questions for Mr. Barbosa? Thank you. Questions or comments among commission members? Mr. May.
So I guess I'm just a little curious about what the wording where you're recommending that the commission commend the USDA for developing design on the west side to accommodate the memorial. So, I mean, exactly how does it how does it accommodate the memorial? Is it just that it's a relatively simple design and could therefore easily be replaced by the memorial? Is that what you're suggesting? And is that a very deliberate move on the part of USDA?
I think it's just acknowledging that it's a more passive part of the site, that the design is flexible and probably could be modified to accommodate a memorial on part of the site. I think that's what that language is meant to acknowledge.
I appreciate that. That does clarify it a bit. But do I understand that that means that the USDA has accepted the fact that this could well be the site of that memorial, or is there still substantial resistance to it? Because the USDA more or less testified against this being used as a site for the memorial at the NCMAC meeting that you referenced.
Mm-hmm. I think I would ask their representatives from USDA to address that question here. So if someone from USDA can.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, my name is Curtis Wolver. I'm Director of Operations for USDA. First of all, let me thank Ms. Hirsch certainly for your presentation. I think she did a very fine job of identifying what our objectives and what it is that we're trying to accomplish with this master plan. With regard to the Liberty Memorial and the site that they have identified, we believe that certainly there is some opportunity and room for us to work together. And if indeed we can identify a plan that meets the interests of both parties, USDA will be supportive of that.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I do have, I guess, one other question, which has to do with the timing of this. I mean, this is in this area on the west side of the building is in phase one, for lack of a better term. And what, I mean, is phase one itself going to be phased, or what is the timing of realizing that? Because I saw it was like 1 to 8 years or whatever.
Right. My understanding is that components of phase one will be broken down into individual projects and then brought forward individually for final approval.
And is there a sense yet of whether the western portion is toward the end of that list of projects or toward the beginning?
Mm-hmm. I don't know that information. I would again ask USDA to.
Yeah, I mean,
the timing of.
If it's not known, that's fine too. I'm just curious.
I'm Tina Lee. I work with OLBN. We were the architects on the project. What our discussions with USDA so far regarding phase one is that they would actually start at the north ceremonial entry court and then expand from there. One of the key things is to focus on implementing perimeter security first, which sort of is throughout the entire site, and then work out from there.
I see. Okay. All right. I think that answers my questions to the extent possible. I do have one other comment, which is that, of course, a reminder that for the work that will have to occur on land that's under the jurisdiction of the Park Service, you'll need to work with the park staff to get a permit for that work. And I know that you have been talking to the park staff, and they've reviewed the EA and so on. And so I think we're, from what I understand, fairly well coordinated on that. But just a reminder for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. May. Other questions? Mr. Provencio?
Just one comment in support. Was pleased to see the shrinking of the perimeter security line closer to the face of the building, freeing up a lot of acreage for adaptive reuse or use for other purposes for these various gardens. So also look forward to seeing what those renderings look like. The narrative sounds good, but would like to see what the ultimate renderings look like. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry.
I just want to say some nice things. Ready?
It's a very good project. I hope you will.
The design is so much improved from the beginning. It really is. I used to say, I think I said to Scott, is Scott here? Yeah. You're trying to serve up tapas when really we need a fixed price menu here. And it's so much better, I think. GSA has been very supportive of the Liberty Memorial. We're working through some legal issues in terms of sequencing, but I'm really hoping that the two designs can land on the runway at the same time, and the objective will be that a visitor won't necessarily know that they're having a different experience, that it will be so seamless that you will, and the narrative that underscores the People's Garden that appropriate connections will be drawn. I would urge, if you can, I mean, I know you probably don't have any money, right? Agriculture, yeah. But since we're also in the business of these ridiculously phased projects that take 20 years to do, and then by the time we're finished, we have to start all over again. If there's any way you can bite off more at one time, that would be very helpful, because by the time you get around, let's just say you start with the farmer's market, which I suspect you probably will, and you move around, and you finally get to 14th Street, by that time, everyone who has any idea of the design vision and your original intent will be gone, and it will morph into some crazy thing on 14th Street. So that has nothing to do with what you intended. So I mean, I'm stating the obvious, but if you can lop off a phase, that would be, and combine one or two, that would be ideal. And Bradley, you surprised me because you didn't ask a question about the fountains as the operator and maintainer. So I will look forward to your questions when we get further along in the design on that. And yes, I would like to see detailed plans for the perimeter security too. So, yes.
Thank you. It is a good project, for sure. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion on the EDR. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of the EDR, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It is passed. Thank you, Ms. Hirsch, very much. That concludes today's agenda. You're not going to talk about the fountain, are you?
No, sir.
Okay.
Just one,
Mr. Prevention.
one quick comment. I want to commend the leadership of Julia Costa.
Yep.
Ms. Costa led a team of three folks, DOD, GSA, and Mr. Hartford and NCPC staff at the Makeover Montgomery County second annual conference. And I just wanted to commend her and her leadership on what an outstanding job she did of pulling those different groups together, getting them to align the vision and present it in an articulate manner. So kudos to Ms. Costa for that effort.
Thank you for that. She is very good. It is a good project. Thanks so much. We are adjourned.